So everything in One Punch Man has just changed. Well, not everything, but everything in the current arc that we have been following for the last 7 chapters. Because One and Murata have decided to change everything about them, meaning the last 7 chapters are just gone now and they are going to be changed or retcon. So we're going all the way back to November, like 5 months ago, to chapter 195. Like the current chapter that we were just on was 202, meaning that Sonic and Flashy Flash meeting up, fighting each other, fighting the Heavenly Ninja Party, and then running into Empty Void, them fighting against him trying to get them to come over to God's side, and then Blast showing up and punching Empty Void. That's all gone now. Doesn't mean that it's gone forever. Probably gonna come back in another way, I suppose. And this isn't the first time that this has happened with One Punch Man. One and Murata have altered large portions of the story on the fly multiple times, especially in the last 5 years, so it's okay. Especially with One Punch Man because it's not released in like weekly Shonen Jump magazines the way that like the other big series that we follow on the channel are. It's released on the Tonari website, and nothing is really finalized until it is ultimately released in the volume. And One Punch Man volumes come out much later than the typical other series volume. But anyway, like I said, we're going back to chapter 195, meaning the last thing that we left off with canonically at this point would be 194, where we saw Flashy Flash meet up with Saitama to challenge him to a training match. The training match, of course, ended in Flashy Flash almost taking a freaking death punch to the face, only to be saved by Genos informing them that there are some internet surfer demon level monsters nearby that they can help out with. When they go to these monsters, coincidentally Sonic is also there. This is also the time where Sonic sees Flashy Flash. This is presumably the first time that they had seen each other since they trained together back in the Ninja Village when they were kids. Also at this point, another coincidence, Hellfire and Gale show up again, meeting up with Sonic, saying that they're going to give him another chance to join up with them to help in Flash's execution. At this point, we're also getting another flashback to when Sonic and Flashy Flash were in the Ninja Village together and them witnessing the God Cube in the Ninja Village as well. So that hasn't changed. That's still going to be a thing for sure. It's kind of integral to the story. But everyone takes care of the monsters, of course. Hellfire and Gale are able to run away after almost getting killed by Flashy Flash, and Sonic is knocked into the ground by Saitama. Then afterwards, Saitama meets up with King and asks him to help him find Minako, to which they quickly do, which Saitama says it only took about 3 panels. Then they ask Minako if she knows anything about God, to which of course she's a little dismissive about. Then Saitama, Flashy Flash, and Minako go to the Hero Association to ask Sitch if they can speak with Blast directly, and to our surprise, Blast was already there. And that's where that chapter ended off, and coming into 195 here, it's essentially kind of staying the same in the beginning. We're seeing Sonic, icing his head after taking that hit from Saitama, with Hellfire and Gale meeting up with him yet again. But this time, they're essentially just going to take out Sonic because I guess they don't care anymore after the last encounter, to which the Heavenly Ninja Party shows up and then knock them both out. Once again, they seemingly pseudo-kill Hellfire and Gale here with a crack noise, insinuating that they are snapping their necks, but in the original chapters that are being retconned now, it turns out that they weren't killed, so I wouldn't be surprised if that changed. It just seems like a waste to kill them at this point. But also, like before, they go on to explain that Empty Void, whose name we technically don't know at this point yet, or he just goes by that man, has awakened. He was in a coma after fighting Blast 15 years ago in a recovery capsule. Now they're going to team up with him and try to take over the world. And they want Sonic to be a part of this plan so that they can lure Flashy Flash out to a location. So yeah, that's all kind of staying the same, but now we're getting into the stuff that has really changed. And that's when Saitama, Flashy Flash, and Minako are meeting up with Blast at the Hero Association. Now, originally when they start talking to Blast in this sequence, Blast reveals he's been working on experimentation with the separation of monster cells, like trying to undo human monstrification through experiments at the Hero Association. And that's all that he was really concerned about, and we actually saw them like zapping some of the monster humans from the martial arts tournament. And it seems like that is still going to be the same, because you can see on the left of Blast that they are still in like the lab being experimented on, but none of that stuff is being touched on anymore. it's now changing to Saitama talking to Blast, thanking him for getting them out of the underground of the Monster Association. And Blast was like, no need to thank me. Your abnormal strength caught my eye at that time too. So this makes more sense because Blast never talked to Saitama about his fight with Garo, which was kind of important, and they kind of just didn't acknowledge it before, but now it seriously is being acknowledged because Sitch suddenly talking to Saitama is like, hey Baldy, Blast just verified, it seems you were the one who defeated Monster Garo. And Saitama's like, I don't really remember any of that. And Sitch is like, you need to retrace your memory, it's urgent. And he's like, well, I'm not gonna remember if you're yelling at me. I can't remember what I can't remember. And he's like, well, that stuff's been resolved anyway, so I don't know why you're angry. And Sitch is like, resolved? There's no way. And of course Saitama doesn't remember the fight with Garo because when he was fighting Garo had killed everyone that was around in that vicinity with his cosmic radiation, and it eventually led to Garo reversing time with his understanding of cosmic energy that God gave him, and he also taught this to Saitama. So when Saitama went back to the previous timeline where everyone didn't die yet, since that was the future Saitama, his previous self merged with him and they combined into one solid entity that is now in the previous timeline, which is now the current timeline. And that wiped Saitama's memories of the future. And Blast is actually remembering this moment. Well, actually right before all of that had happened, he's going back to the moment of when Garo launched off that gamma ray burst at Saitama, because that's essentially the last thing that would have happened before time was reverted, because future Saitama comes right after that moment and then punches Garo and defeats him. But Blast is like, without a doubt, the Earth was in danger at that point. I saw a freaking gamma ray burst fire off. That thing could have easily destroyed Earth if it was aimed at it. And then Sitch is like, what on earth is Caves Baldy? If he was able to defeat that, then what the heck is he? And Blast is like, I don't know. I couldn't see the bottom at all, but we need to find out. But I didn't sense any malice from him, so it shouldn't be any problems leaving him at large. And then Sitch is like, yeah, even if we did try to restrain him, Demon Cyborg won't stay silent, Genos. And it's like, yeah, that's the problem here. Restraining Saitama isn't the issue, it's Genos. Still, we've got a little delusion in these characters, which is a hallmark of the series. And then the chapter ends with Sitch asking Blast, hey, do you think this crisis has been averted since, Garo was defeated? And Blast's like, no. Rather, the real deal has just begun, because in truth, a greater threat than Garo is imminent. Now, apparently the original translation for this is Garo Ijo, or above Garo. I don't want to say that that's a new disaster level. We already have Ryu Ijo, above Dragon. I don't know if Garo Ijo or above Garo is a new thing, but a greater threat than Garo is imminent, which is something that we've been talking about for a while. There's no way that the series was just going to eclipse at that point with Cosmic Fear Garo being the strongest. In theory, God could keep making people like that. Now, granted, they're not all as gifted as Garo, but there are some people who are inherently just stronger than Garo. So, if you used Cosmic Fear powers on them, they would, in theory, become stronger. Maybe not have as much knowledge and talent as him, but they would be on paper stronger. For example, Boros, maybe. But I love that they're changing this and actually talking about that fight now, because it was kind of odd that they didn't address it before. And I also like that Blast is bringing up that yeah, I didn't sense any malice from Saitama, so it shouldn't be a problem leaving him at large. This could play into a future storyline where Blast deems Saitama like a threat to humanity because he is too strong. And this goes back to one of the earliest Blast theories that I talked about on this channel over 5 years ago, maybe. So Blast is way stronger than what we initially thought. Actually, not only Blast, but also Empty Void, the leader of the Ninja Village. He has been buffed. He is way stronger than what he originally was. He's easily one of the strongest characters in the series right now, and we'll get into why that is, of course. So we're continuing the retcon of the Ninja Village arc. I went over all of this stuff in my previous video what the retcon is, why it was changed, and what's going to happen essentially, and what's going on with those changes. So if you want to know what's going on with that, or you just need a refresher, please check out my previous chapter video. I'll have it linked in the top right or at the end of this video. So coming into this one, we're continuing the discussion between Flashy Flash Saitama and Blast at the Hero Association, and Flashy Flash just comes right out with it at Blast, and he's like, you know what, tell me about God that you've been fighting. That's what I initially came here to ask you about. And Blast is like, bro, if you're thinking about joining this fight, just forget about it. You would just die against God. And at this point, we have a rough idea of how strong you relatively have to be in order to fight against God or even one of his top disciples, such as like Cosmic Fear Garo, and Flashy Flash is nowhere near that level. I mean, Flashy Flash himself even accepted death against Cosmic Fear Garo just standing before him. So obviously he would just get literally atomized by God just looking at him at this point. And Blast obviously knows that. But going further, Flashy Flash reestablishes the Ninja Village lore that we already knew, such as like the Ninja Village was a training facility for high-class assassins. It was located deep in the mountains, inaccessible to ordinary people because of a barrier put around it. We still don't know exactly what this barrier technically is, but it seems like Empty Void might be an Esper or some kind of Esper adjacent type being, so he could do barriers kind of like how Tatsumaki can or something. We're also getting the flashback of when Sonic and Flashy Flash were children in the Ninja Village, seeing Empty Void in his recovery capsule, as well as seeing the God Cube on display. And in this new continuity, Flashy Flash is quickly putting the pieces together here, which he really didn't before, where he just cuts to the chase again, and he's like, so we can assume that the Ninja Village leader Empty Void was granted power by God, and that in order to produce and ship first-class assassins to the village, he put the youngsters through this training in a way to produce efficient minions for God. So everything was just a front organization for God. And he's like, isn't that right, Blast? And like, they didn't talk about all this stuff before, but I'm glad that they're establishing this now, because Flashy Flash is for sure intelligent enough to put this stuff together. And I also like the way that he says a front organization for God, because, you know, as we talked about before, this is happening in multiple places simultaneously. Like the Monster Association, the first big villain organization that we were introduced to in this series, that was a front organization for God. Ninja Village is a front organization for God. Tsukuyomi, the Esper organization that is able to produce Espers, the same organization that had Tatsumaki as a child, that is a front organization for God. I'm not going to spoil anything, but I'll just say the organization, you know, the robot guy, in my opinion, they are for sure a front organization for God. But again, Blast is like, look, I understand and I can sympathize, but I just can't accept your help. You're just gonna freaking die, dude. You can't manipulate the cosmos. That's like bare minimum to fight against God here. But then Blast reveals that, you know, that guy that you're talking about, that man, the leader of the Ninja Village, his name is actually Empty Void, and he was my former partner. But when we were searching for the cubes, he fell under God's control. Because, you know, when you touch the cube, you're able to communicate with God. If you're worthy, then you accept his power. If not, then you like turn to dust. And Blast is placing the blame on himself for this. Like, he feels as though he failed because he wasn't able to help Empty Void. And because of that, he essentially allowed Empty Void to become what he was and start the Ninja Village, which led to all the kids being victims to this. And then also all of the assassinations that took place because of the people coming from the village. And then Flash was like, so your partner was used as a pawn by the enemy and you let him get away? Blast is like, that's a harsh way to put it. Originally, he and I were equal in ability. And since he was given the power, he had a big advantage, but he gave him a serious wound that will take 15 years to recover from. So this has changed a lot, because before this was not said. Before it seemed like Empty Void was not as strong as Blast, not even close. But now they were equals, and once he received God's power, he had an advantage. So Empty Void, like I said, shot way up on the power scale. If he is truly an equal to Blast, or even has somewhat of a slight advantage over him, then he is disaster level God. Before, we were putting him around above Dragon, which seemed accurate maybe, but no, he might straight up be God level at this point. I don't want to jump the gun, but man, he really might be that strong at this point, because we actually see him do something at the end of the chapter. But this is also why Empty Void had to go into that recovery capsule, because whatever Blast did to him, injure him All Might style or something. And Flashy Flash gives Blast more guff for allowing him to escape, and he's like, you know what, forget about it, I'll find find out about God on my own. You stay out of it. And then Saitama chimes in and he's like, so what do you want to do about your partner? And before he can respond, we see that they're continuing to conduct the experiments on the martial artists turned monsters in the martial arts tournament back in season 2. So this was also happening in the previous continuity before the retcons. This is going to be like a big storyline going forward in the series for sure. And it's Blast and the Hero Association trying to figure out how to reverse monsterization, or at least for the most part, experimenting with the separation of monster cells, as they specifically say, because, you know, all of these individuals were humans originally. And speaking of that, Minako is like scared of seeing this. She's like, I was never a human to begin with, okay? So there's no point in doing that stuff to me, which is true. If you were born a monster, obviously it would be redundant. And it's interesting that Minako brings that up because in the previous continuity before the retcons, Minako revealed that she was born from the flesh of Giro, like the monster puppet that Psychos made to control, to be like the covert leader of the Monster Association so that she didn't have to appear as a sexy woman. And they haven't revealed that yet in this new continuity. So I wonder if they're waiting for that to happen because, like I've been saying for years, guys, there is something about Minako that cannot be trusted. Like on the surface, she believes that she is a good guy at this point, but I think something will happen that turns her evil or turns her into a foil for the heroes because she bears the singular eye. That's like a dead giveaway for one's writing. But we see Hamukichi, like the bear monster martial artist guy, wanting to willingly continue this experimentation to reverse his monsterization because he feels bad for accepting the monster cells in front of all the kids in the dojo, and he can't go back there afterwards unless he's a human again. And it's promising for the Hero Association and the story, of course, because this shows that they'll eventually be able to break through and undo this monsterization, because there are a few characters that are monsters that were originally humans that need to have that process undone to them. Some haven't been revealed yet, but then some we know of with Empty Void, Blast's partner, which is why Blast is so close to this project. He's trying to bring Empty Void back to being a human. And it hasn't been revealed in this continuity yet, but in the previous, it was revealed that Empty Void has like this ability to open like this dimension that God is hiding inside of. They called it the Celestial Rock Cave. I don't know if they're going to change that, but that's probably going to come back in some way, maybe. Also, another interesting thing here, going back to Hamukichi willingly wanted to continue the experimentation. Sitch says that it's just as Silverfang stated in his report, the key to rescinding monsterization seems to be in their psychological state. This is a callback to the Monster Association arc. When Bang, Bomb, and Fubuki encountered Super S, she had like turned some random civilians into monsters with like her whip monster power stuff. And we saw that they eventually were able to undo the monsterization just from like not wanting to be monsters, essentially. Like as it says, their psychological state. And Bang witnessed that and saw promise for Garo to do the same thing to himself because he was still on the verge of being a full-blown monster at that point. So I like that they're continuing that whole aspect and that Bang actually did write that down and told the Hero Association about it. But then suddenly Blast senses Empty Void. Apparently he has woken up from his 15-year coma and he's attacking the Hero Association. And Blast activates one of his barrier event horizon singularity things and encapsulates the entire Hero Association. This is wild. And he like sends it to another dimension or wherever he sends it for like a moment just to avoid Empty Void's attack, which is called Dimension Blade, is so big and powerful that it's like taking up miles seemingly in multiple directions and could have maybe one-shotted the entire Hero Association. I mean, it probably would have, since Blast needed to do something this drastic to stop it. So this goes back to what we were talking about. Empty Void might very well be disaster level God at this point. If this is just his welcoming attack here, just sending a message, then Blast brings the Hero Association back and explains what had just happened with Empty Void recovering and him launching his Dimension Blade and how this was just a greeting to them. And Saitama's like, you think you can win? And then Blast is like, well, I'll figure it out. I haven't just been playing around either. And then in the final panel, Saitama's looking off to the distance with Minako and he's like, that looks like Tatsumaki. So that's really interesting because if it is Tatsumaki coming, then she might possibly reunite with Blast here, who seemingly she hasn't seen in a very long time. I mean, she did technically see Blast when he saved her from God's influence back in the Monster Association arc, but as far as we know, she hasn't had like a face-to-face with Blast in a very long time. So at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if Blast kind of just like dips out before Tatsumaki gets there. Or I'm just jumping the gun here and Saitama is kind of just making an observational joke on the cuts in the ground, you know, leading towards the Hero Association, because they kind of look like Tatsumaki's skirt dress thing, possibly. So we're seeing a new villain in One Punch Man that's possibly even stronger than Cosmic Fear Garo, because he somehow absorbed Cosmic Fear Garo's power. Yeah, that's right, because this chapter opens up with a flashback of us seeing Saitama defeating Cosmic Fear Garo from like 2 years ago, you know, in our time. And at that time, when he was defeated, his cosmicness, God power, smoke stuff like seeped out of his face. And as Blast was witnessing this, he explained that at that time he was trying to reduce like the cosmic radiation that was coming from Garo by using a gravitational field to send it into like another dimension. But it also turns out that, like we said, as Garo's cosmicness, God smoke, was coming out of him, it was seeping into that singularity as well. But in that singularity was Empty Void, the leader of the ninja village. So we had no idea that he was going to be here, because in the previous chapter we saw that he had apparently awakened from a 15-year coma that Blast put him in, and that he sent like this welcoming attack to the Hero Association with the Dimension Slash, which was incredibly powerful. Like, it probably could have nuked the entire Hero Association if Blast didn't save it. But now we're seeing that he was able to do that in the first place because of what he had done prior to meeting them there after Saitama defeated Cosmic Fear Garo, because he sucked up all of that cosmic power that Garo had or had lost. And we see that he like is emaciated at this point, because I guess he was still recovering or coming out of that coma. But now sucking that up has like buffed him up, and he looks different than he did in the previous version. He has like a mask or something maybe. But in response to this, Blast like fires off a freaking Dragon Ball Z ki blast thing at him. Like, we've never seen Blast do this before. This is wild. This is, I suppose, some kind of energy manipulation or something. And Empty Void, with his new strength, is able to just cut it. I guess this is also his dimensional slash that he's using here, which is wild. It even shocks Blast. So yeah, this guy is unbelievably powerful, like we were talking about in the previous review. He very likely is disaster level God in strength. As Blast continues to fight against him in this flashback, he sends like 2 more of these cosmic blasts through wormholes trying to get behind Empty Void, but Empty Void can like manipulate space by grabbing it. If you follow Jujutsu Kaisen, this is very similar to what Uro Takako's curse technique is, where he can literally grab space itself and pull it, diverting the blasts away. And then he's able to escape after that point, and that's the last time Blast had saw him before the dimensional slash was sent to the Hero Association in the previous chapter. And when we come back to real time, Blast explains it to everyone by saying that the power he took coming out of Garo made him that much stronger, and he was able to revive himself. And that he is also able, of course, to move between dimensions like Blast, meaning that he can use like that singularity ability. And that since he's been making preparations while hiding in another dimension, he's going on the offensive now. And then they ask, like, the Dimension Slash, is that like a psychic power? And Blast says no, it's one of God's powers, because interference from the higher dimension where God is located ignores distance, energy, and size. So yeah, time and space manipulation, which is common with God's set of powers, so at least that we've seen he's been able to give to Cosmic Fear Garo. And then he says as to what extent it ignores them depends on the capabilities of the subject. So yeah, obviously God's powers can't just be bestowed onto like anyone, especially at this level. Like, yeah, Homeless Emperor was able to get like the energy manipulation aspect, but full control over time, space, and energy, like all aspects of the cosmos, you're really gonna need an exceptional individual individual like Garo, or with, in this case, Empty Void. And after hearing all of that stuff, Sitch realizes like, oh, I have to make sure those guys are safe. You know, I'm sure hearing about the cube and how individuals can be manipulated by God made him realize it, and the people that he's thinking about are Second Gar, Metal Bat, and Child Emperor. He's thinking about them because a couple chapters back it was revealed that they're all leaving the Hero Association to join the Neo Heroes, but they're kind of like being spies. They're not like straight up really leaving the Hero Association. They're just going over there to intercept them, essentially. That's kind of what they all agreed on. At least Child Emperor and Second Gar. Metal Bat is kind of just going there to be Second Gar's bodyguard. After this, Flashy Flash gets the letter of challenge from Sonic, which we saw before, but now in this retcon version, it's like the Hero Association is giving it to him. And he's once again challenging Flashy Flash to meet him at the original place that they had planned to make the new Ninja Village as kids. And at first, it's implied that Sonic is going to like fight him to the death because Sonic, of course, was coaxed into doing this by the Heavenly Ninja Party early on, after Empty Void had awakened. And they wanted to either get Flashy Flash out of the picture or bring him over to God's side and make him a disciple as well. And once they figure out the logistics of things, Blast says, okay, you can go ahead, but if we all go together, it might alert Void. So go there first, and then if he appears, tap this signal sender thing and it'll alarm me, and then he'll go there and, you know, fight Empty Void, because Blast is like the only guy who can, aside from Saitama, of course. But it seems like Saitama's probably going to be sitting this one out, or at least I hope so, because he does say that since Blast is on alert for this stuff, he's just going to go chill with Monako and eat curry udon. So yeah, Saitama might be out of this arc for the remainder of it, possibly. But then for the rest of the chapter, we go over the stuff that we had already went over before in the previous retcon arc, where we're getting more flashbacks of Sonic and Flashy Flash as children in the Ninja Village. And once again, it comes up that Sonic was born in the Ninja Village. And at that time, it made me think that Sonic might be the son of Empty Void, which I still think is a possibility, but things have been changed a little bit with the Celestial Rock Cave stuff, whether that's still a thing, and if Empty Void is the only one who can open it, and maybe that's Sonic's significance in this series later on. I don't know. I don't even know if Empty Void is still inherently possibly an Esper, which means that Sonic could be in some way. It's still, like I said, a possibility, but we're just gonna have to wait for a little bit more information to see how things are changing in the upcoming chapters, I suppose. But going forward, Sonic, of course, reveals that he had a dream of making a new, better Ninja Village, where it doesn't just raise a bunch of psychopaths to be mindless assassins. And he shows on a map where he wants to make it. That, of course, is the place where they are going to meet to have their quote-unquote final battle. So they eventually meet there, and they draw their swords, and they exchange their words, with Flashy Flash mainly wanting to know if this order came from Empty Void. He's trying to gauge if Sonic has gone over to his side. And Sonic's like, that's a stupid question. This has nothing to do with that fossil. I just simply remember when I ran into you the other day that we never settled who is stronger. And that reassures Flashy Flash. It's like, okay, it's still Sonic. He hasn't gone over to Empty Void. He hasn't gone over to God. He's kind of just doing this of his own volition. And he reiterates to himself that, like, yeah, there's no way that we compete with Empty Void, because he's remembering back to the dimensional slash and how big it was. So then he thinks at this point he could just give Sonic this final battle so that he could leave him with no regrets. Because of course, it still hasn't come to fruition yet that they are both kind of like wannabe friends subconsciously, but they have to get like this fight out of their system first to realize that they're both better working together than against each other. So we're seeing the vastly improved battle between Flashy Flash and Sonic in this chapter. It's actually turning out to be one of the best single chapter fights in the series. Not only that, we're also feeling Saitama's terrifying presence in this chapter. It's been a little bit since he hasn't really done much as of late, and it seems like he's probably going to be sitting out the majority of this arc, if not all of it. But coming off of the previous chapter, we saw a flashback between Empty Void fighting Blast, and we found out that Empty Void is like rivaling Cosmic Fear Garo in power now, meaning that Flashy Flash Sonic aren't really going to be able to take him down without Blast's help. So they formulate a plan after receiving a letter of challenge from Sonic, and that's because Sonic was given the instructions by the Heavenly Ninja Party, which was recruited by Empty Void to lure Flashy Flash out, to essentially pull Flashy Flash over to God's side and make him another disciple for him, just the way that Empty Void is, or just straight up kill him. So that's why they're using Sonic for this. Then after reading the letter, Flash and Blast devise a plan. In case Empty Void shows up at this meeting place, which seems likely, and like we were saying, they're gonna need Blast to fight against him. So Blast gives him like this communicator and tells him to alert him if he shows up. Then Flash gives Blast directions to where the meeting place is for their fight, but it seems like he's giving Blast the wrong directions because he kind of wants to take care of this by himself, since the meeting place is where Flashy Flash and Sonic picked to make the new version of the Ninja Village that, doesn't raise psychos. And this is also where it's revealed that Saitama is gonna pretty much sit this one out and kind of just gonna have curry udon with Monako. So coming into this chapter, we see that Sonic and Flashy Flash have met at the meeting place for their final battle. But we quickly go into a flashback after that, which I assume is the moment where Sonic and Flashy Flash meet for the first time as children in the Ninja Village. They're both placed in like the weakling group, which is called Squad 5. And I assume this is because they're both not psychopaths. This is also probably the reason why they get along so quickly, because we find out that in the Ninja Village, there's like 72-hour days, and 6 of those are dedicated to sleeping. The food had no flavor, and all info from the outside was completely blocked off. And they spent every day living as machines that did nothing but learn skills for killing, and they were not allowed to display any human emotions. And those with dead emotions were considered top performers. So yeah, that's not so much the case with Flashy Flash and Sonic, especially as kids. So like I said, understandable that they would get along quickly, and that they did. They developed a quick camaraderie, with Sonic even showing Flashy Flash some special assassination techniques. This kind of one-on-one training and camaraderie, obviously they weren't allowed to have. Then we come back to the present and the fight starts, and you would expect Flashy Flash to just beat down Sonic considering how much more powerful he is on paper, but no, that's not the case at all. Sonic is extremely competitive in this fight and actually has moments where he has the upper hand on Flashy Flash. Like I said in the beginning, this is a vast improvement on their original fight because, like we've been talking about, this whole arc has been retconned from the original. And in the original, the fight was kind of lackluster and pretty one-sided, but now this more so parallels to its webcomic equivalent, which I also talked about in my original reviews for these chapters, back with the original continuity, which I think is very fitting because Sonic should be able to be a good matchup for Flashy Flash since he knows his style and straight up helped train him. And we see some awesome sequences, such as them like trading wind blade kicks, Sonic getting hit with flash kicks, which is one of his ultimate techniques, and pretty much just taking it and retaliating with like shurikens. Then Sonic is able to hit Flashy with the 9 Shadow Funeral that he turns all into wind blade kicks. This is a really cool sequence that not even Flashy Flash is able to get the upper hand on, with Sonic almost catching him off guard, until Flash is pretty much forced to use his ultimate technique, the Flash Fist, which is incredible look. It's like a meteor coming down almost. And this makes Flash realize how far Sonic has come, because he didn't think that he'd have to use like his ultimate technique against him. And Flash is like, it's too early to give up. The way you are now, we could. And before he can finish that sentence, the Heavenly Ninja Party shows up. And what he was going to say was basically like, we can work together, which is like the whole point of this fight. Like, they want to be friends. They kind of just have to get this fight out of their system. It's been built up for a very long time. They haven't really seen each other since the end of the Ninja Village when they were kids, and they've both led different paths and become much different people. But in the end, they were always super compatible. But now that the Heavenly Ninja Party has showed up, they realize that Flash and Sonic are kind of just doing their own thing and not working with them, which what they originally thought. Because, like I said, they originally contracted Sonic to lure Flashy Flash out, but they're seeing here that it wasn't the time that they agreed on or the place. Then Sonic comes back and just blitzes through the Heavenly Ninja Party. Turns out Sonic was able to just take that Flash Fist as well, showing that, yeah, he's pretty powerful now. I think the consensus at this point is Flash is probably around like high dragon level, somewhere around there. So really impressive that Sonic is able to take these shots. Sure, Flashy isn't trying to kill him, but Sonic has probably progressed to at least dragon minimum level at this point, probably. Then once it's revealed that Sonic is pretty much turning on them, and of course, keeping up his facade, saying, I wanted to take down Flash myself rather than hand him over, because it was revealed at the end of the previous chapter that that Sonic isn't on board with Empty Void or the Heavenly Ninja Party, which is something that Flash needed to confirm for himself before going into this fight with him. And then the Heavenly Ninja Party's like, have you lost your mind? We're just gonna kill both of you now. All of us are extremely powerful elite ninjas. It's pointless to try to take us all on. And then Sonic looks at them and he's like, they're so tiny, smaller than grains of sand, relating them to Saitama. And this is where the terrifying aura of him comes back, because we get this incredible panel of Sonic envisioning Saitama just as a mountain over them, which essentially he is. We all know the dynamic between Sonic and Saitama at this point in the series, and Sonic has fought against him many times and has been punched by him and defeated many times as well. So he knows what true absolute power is. So pretty much everything at this point for Sonic will always be comparing someone to Saitama. And when he looks at the Heavenly Ninja Party, he's like, yeah, you guys are nothing compared to him. So naturally he's super confident in his ability against them at this point. But I really like this sequence because, first of all, Saitama looks awesome, and it just shows how far Sonic has become. And instead of really chasing after Saitama as a trophy, he more so just sees him as possibly a force of nature at this point, something that he doesn't really have control over. And somehow Flash knows that Sonic is thinking of Saitama here, because he's like, so you just don't keep challenging Cape Baldy for the sake of it. And then at the end of the chapter, Sonic's like, but for now, let's shut up these guys, shall we? So yeah, they're gonna work together as we saw before and just completely clown the Heavenly Ninja Party. But what happens after that, really up in the air. Very likely that Empty Void is gonna show up, and if they fight against him, they're gonna get absolutely destroyed, because he's way more powerful now than what he was in the original version when they fought against him. So maybe Blast shows up quicker. So One Punch Man is getting really violent again, because there are people getting straight up decimated in this chapter, unlike we've seen in a little bit, I suppose, because Sonic and Flash are straight up running through the Heavenly Ninja Party in this chapter. Because coming off of the previous, we saw that Flashy Flash and Sonic had met up at Sonic's meeting place, the location that he originally chose when they were children in the Ninja Village to make his own new Ninja Village. And after having their surprisingly somewhat competitive fight, with Sonic surviving a Flash Fist with taking relatively little damage, the Heavenly Ninja Party showed up, realizing that Sonic wasn't actually on their side and that he had given them the wrong location and everything, and that it was time to not only take out Flashy Flash but also Sonic as well now. And at this point, Sonic and Flash Flash were like, you know what, we got the fight out of our system, let's team up and take these guys down. So coming into this chapter, the fight begins and we see one of them lunging this bladed whip thing at them, arrogantly saying that the sound of the cutter whip breaks the sound barrier, which is obviously nothing compared to Sonic and Flashy Flash, especially the latter. And with that being said, Sonic instantly takes this guy's head off. We haven't really seen Sonic show this type of brutality since the very beginning of the series, when he killed those Paradisers. So just showing that while Sonic is full-blown babyface at this point, he's still not afraid to kill humans. Then right after, Flashy Flash goes into Flowing Shadow Feet, where the narrator tells us that with an even greater supersonic shockwave, a whip of light slashed the Heavenly Ninjas, and Flashy Flash takes out 4 of them in one move. Another violent sequence here. And we knew that Flashy Flash wasn't afraid of killing humans either. So this is a big difference between the original fight that we saw between Flashy Flash, Sonic, and the Heavenly Ninja Party, because, we've been going through this new changed retconned arc lately, starting all the way back at chapter 194. And originally the fight was a little more competitive than this, with Flashy Flash and Sonic kind of showing mercy to the Heavenly Ninja Party and not killing them, surprisingly. And even after the fight was over, when Empty Void showed up, he himself then killed the Heavenly Ninja Party by sucking up their organs, but then it turns out that that was just a genjutsu and they were still alive. So originally One wanted these guys alive for some reason, maybe to show that they can be changed, because they're all victims of circumstance. Inherently they were all pulled into the Ninja Village the same way that Sonic and Flashy Flash were. But no, that is no longer the case. They are being brutally killed by Flash and Sonic here. And another interesting thing about this is that this is the first time that One has decided to change the fate of opponents for the heroes. Because if we go back a couple years to another retcon sequence, it was when My Mask was going against Narinki's squad, where we saw one of the most brutal sequences in the series, with a My Mask exploding them, only for that to be retconned later on with E-Iron saving them from from being killed by my mask. But anyway, when we come back to the fight, we see that one of them was actually able to nick Flashy Flash on the face, which is somewhat of an impressive feat in itself, I suppose. And we also see that Hellfire and Gale are struggling in this fight, and the remaining Heavenly Ninja Party ninjas like kick them in, and they're like, you know, stop relaxing and go in, fodder, where they're trying to use them as like a device to distract Flashy Flash while lumping on top of him, where they're gonna stab through the Heavenly Ninja Party just to get to Flashy Flash. But Flash is able to grab Gale and like use him as a club to beat the Heavenly Ninja Party guys, which ultimately lands him into Gale's like thin bladed wire things, and this guy gets annihilated too. Then Sonic, I guess, is speaking here, and he's questioning why Flashy Flash isn't finishing them off. And Flash says, you know, when I met these guys at the Monster Association hideout, they had been monsters. They could be samples for undoing monsterization. Now, this is important because this is what Blast is currently working on at the Hero Association. He's been experimenting on the monsters from the martial arts tournament, the martial artists who became them through monster cells, as well as the information that they got from Bang after seeing the humans who were able to undo their monsterization after being whipped by Super S. Because ultimately, Blast wants to undo the monsterization that happened to Empty Void. Because, you know, Empty Void was originally just a regular ninja, and he was like Blast's teammate. So it's kind of important that Hellfire and Gale live here for that purpose, to have further research done on them, because they did eat monster cells themselves, and somehow they were able to go in between human and monster form. One of the very few examples that we've seen of that in this series. Then some more coordination from Sonic and Flash here, where Sonic is like throwing these exploding shurikens around the remaining Heavenly Ninja Party members. And then we see the following sequence where Flash and Sonic are jetting in between all of the debris that's flying from the explosion, like cars and whatnot, because they're kind of like in a landfill. And we get that classic speed sequence of just darting back and forth, where Sonic ultimately just beheads all the remaining members here besides Hellfire and Gale. And just like that, they have been defeated in one chapter and brutally executed as well. And then coming to the end of the chapter, we get this pretty cool sequence where Flash actually says out loud to Sonic, saying like, hey, you know, I was just trying to make sure that you weren't succumbing to Empty Void. And Sonic's like, you know, don't be stupid. Not even that fossil is a concern of mine. Rather, it's just a great chance to see your skills while severing ties with the village, explaining why he fought Flashy Flash in the previous chapter, which we pretty much knew. And then Sonic's like, yeah, I'm just relieved that you don't seem useless, so you can be the right-hand man of the new leader of this village. And that makes Flashy Flash smile, because he remembers, you know, back when they were kids in the Ninja Village, Sonic's plans of making a new Ninja Village where they didn't raise psychopaths. And I'm sure he's also kind of happy that Sonic, you know, wants to team with him and wants him to be by his side to make the new village. And then in the final panel, Flash is like, are you sure that it's good for you to be the leader even though you're weaker than me? And then Sonic's like, should I kill you after all? So some great camaraderie here. Although it seems like after this, Empty Void is going to show up once again, and it's not going to look so good for these guys, because at this point he is rivaling Cosmic Fear Garo in power. At least it's implied that he is, and Sonic and Flash are nowhere near that. So either they're going to nearly be killed by him, or he's going to try to convert them over to God's side like he originally did, or Blast is going to show up and they're all going to fight him together possibly, even though on paper Blast should be able to fight him by himself, but we'll see what happens. So God is returning in the latest One Punch Man chapter, as well as the leader of the Ninja Village, Empty Void. Of course, we're continuing the retcon version of the Ninja Village arc here, with Empty Void trying to convert Flashy Flash and Sonic over to God's side by using the cube on them once again. And coming off of the previous chapter, we saw Flashy Flash and Sonic finally teaming up to take down the Heavenly Ninja Party, which they did kind of easily, I guess. And it was very violent as well, one of the more violent chapters that we've gotten in recent memory. And coming into this chapter, after they had defeated everyone, Sonic is kind of reflecting on Flashy Flash here, seeing as how he's become so powerful, since he hasn't really seen him in action since they were kids in the Ninja Village. But he's like, honestly, I thought I had gotten great training for my series of battles with Saitama, but Flash's growth was beyond imagination, though not on the same level as mine, obviously. You know, continuing using Sonic's delusion, which is hilarious as always. But going further, he's like, just what kind of guys he's been fighting since he became a hero, and we see Saitama, pre-Cosmic Garo, and Platinum S. So just like Sonic, Flashy Flash had fought Saitama, of course, although it was more of like a training exercise, if anything, but he full-on fought pre-Cosmic Garo and Platinum S. Actually, I don't even know what to really call this Garo. I think I had a name for him before. I forget what it is. Let me know in the comments what like the popular community name for this version of Garo is. Is this like Awakened Garo in the manga version? And then I guess Cosmic Fear Garo is just even above Awakened. But anyway, these two are for sure like certified above dragons. Sonic hasn't really been fighting individuals like this. Although coming into that fight, Flashy Flash was already close to their level, I guess, or at least strong enough to fight against them in that triple threat match without just being killed instantly. But that's besides the point, since Sonic has grown a lot on his own, quite recently actually. He's become really powerful coming into this arc, which is understandable because he sat out most of the Monster Association arc, especially the latter portion of it. But anyway, they're coming across the final member of the Heavenly Ninja Party who's still alive, and he's basically just hyping up Empty Void by saying like they have no chance against him, he's just way too powerful, and that he can unleash endless ninjutsu so intense that you'd think they were genjutsu, which is, you know, pretty interesting because when we saw Empty Void fight Flash and Sonic in the previous version of this arc, he was essentially using genjutsus against them. But Sonic, of course, is just dismissing him as he normally would, and it ultimately comes to this guy just dying, and Sonic talking to Flash is like, it seems like that man, you know, referring to Empty Void, will come all the way here just to be hunted down, Flash. And then he looks at Flash, and Flash is like, yeah. And he's a little thrown off by that. And he's like, oh, you think he's already here? And that's the whole interesting part because he already is here. This is Empty Void impersonating Flashy Flash. And if you go back to like the very first page of this chapter, he was there since that point. Because at the end of the previous chapter, Flashy Flash and Sonic were having like their fun little camaraderie back and forth. And I guess it's in between the end of chapter 199 and the beginning of 200. That's when Empty Void showed up and impersonated Flashy Flash before Sonic. And Empty Void impersonating Flash here is like, I can't sense any signs of him, but since he must have sent the Heavenly Ninja Party to have a look at our capabilities, anyway, Sonic, would you? And then he pulls out the cube and he has Sonic touch it. And then that's when Flashy Flash comes in and he's like, don't touch it, Sonic. Now, where was Flashy Flash when this was happening? I don't know. How did Empty Void isolate Sonic in the seconds that seemingly happened between 199 and 200? I don't know, but it happened, and Flashy Flash is coming in and he slashes directly through Empty Void impersonating him, but it's just too late because Sonic has already touched the cube and we see it like traveling up to his brain and affecting it. That's more brain symbology that we've seen associated with God. Maybe this could symbolize it like affecting his pineal gland, which is like also referred to as the third eye, and we know that that Esper ability where you can see into the future is also referred to the third eye, and it also connects back to, like I said, with brain symbology. Back when God gave Psychos like that initial power up when she fused with Orochi, the cover page for that chapter showed the veins and roots of that creature forming like a brain. But anyway, after Flash slices through Empty Void, he just easily avoids it and winds up behind him grabbing his hand, and he's like, too slow. And Flash tries to counter him with a kick, but Empty Void just hits him with the cube in the chest, and this also hits his brain as well. And then after that, it like sends Flash into like the sunken place from Get Out, and this is just sending him into his own genjutsu world, or sending him into that psychic place that we talked about before that Phoenix Man seemingly sent Child Emperor to. But before we get into that, we actually see Empty Void here, of course, and he looks like his previous version, which is interesting because at the beginning of this retcon arc, we saw that he had like changed his form after he had like absorbed the cosmic power that Garo had released after he was defeated by Saitama, and it changed him into like this masked looking form, but he doesn't look like that here. So either this is, I guess, Empty Void's, you could say, base form, and he'll eventually like power up to that cosmic mode that he could have. What I guess that he does have, meaning that we're probably going to see 2 layers of the fight here, but I'll get more into that. So he sends Flash into the sunken place, and there he meets God, who is impersonating Sonic. And just as we saw in the previous version, it's, you know, them as children with God impersonating Sonic, trying to like trick Flash into accepting his influence by grabbing his hand, which we saw before. That's like kind of what he does. He reached out to Tatsumaki impersonating Blast, and he reached out to Garo impersonating Bang. The latter he got to touch his hand at least, which was enough to send his cosmic energy into him and to make him into Cosmic Fear Garo. But what we're seeing here with Flash, it's not going to be that simple. Now, again, this is, you know, changing what originally happened. So I don't know if it's going to play out the same way, because that's where the chapter ends. In the original version, what happened with this is that Sonic came in at the last second and cut Empty Void, like, in reality. And that, like, broke the Genjutsu inside of Flashy Flash before he had to like touch God's hand. So I guess that could happen again. And it also showed us like the Genjutsu dream world thing that Sonic was experiencing. And it was like where these monster cells like became alive and tried to get Sonic to eat them. That was like God's trying to convince Sonic to become one of his disciples, but it didn't work on him. And then that gave him enough time to slash Empty Void. Now, like I said, is that going to happen again? Not sure, but I'm sure something like that will happen to some extent. And then they both wind up fighting Empty Void, to where it's not looking like it's gonna go well for them, because he outspeeds both of them, and that's when Blast shows up and he just winds up punching Empty Void. And that's like where the original Ninja arc ended before they decided to retcon it. So that might happen again, and then maybe they'll have like an extended fight against Empty Void in like his base form, I guess you could say, and maybe it'll be somewhat competitive. And then when he powers up to like his cosmic mode, that's when Blast shows up, and maybe we'll get like a full-fledged fight out of Blast here, where he fights like Cosmic Empty Void, and it's like a serious cosmic level battle, which would be incredible. So we're seeing a level of power in this chapter that we've never seen before, not even from Cosmic Fear Garo, because Empty Void, the leader of the Ninja Village, can like go outside of the universe and then observe the parallel worlds that branch out from it, and then he can attack them using his quote-unquote special jutsu, the Dimension Slash that we saw before. I know this is wild stuff. It's changing everything. It's completely altering the power scale, and we'll get into how he's able to do this and what else is going on, of course. But first, coming off of the previous chapter, we saw that when Empty Void did show up, he immediately went after Flash and Sonic with the cube, trying to convince them to join God by taking his hand using a Genjutsu. And that was like the cliffhanger. It's like, is Flash going to accept it? And we knew that he wasn't, because in the previous version of this arc, he didn't. And what do you know, in this version, he isn't either, because once again, Sonic is saving him. Sonic is able to break out of his Genjutsu influence world, just like before, except we're not seeing what Sonic saw. He's just immediately coming into reality and punching Flash in the face to wake him up. And Sonic explains it as, I guess it's a sort of a Genjutsu that takes advantage of emotional dependencies in your heart to tempt you. And Flash is like, me? Emotionally dependent? Remembering that he saw young Sonic when they were kids in the Ninja Village. And of course, Flash tries to play it off like that didn't happen. Now he realizes that he does have like a connection with Sonic, or at least he's realizing it, and he can't really be so delusional about it as he was before. Then they start having this back and forth with Empty Void, to where he's like, you know, those who are confident in their abilities cannot maintain relationship as equals. And they're like, what? We're not equals. Are you talking about you and Blast? He's like, no, in skills, Flash excels, but in the heart, Sonic leads, achieving a balance, which is nice, because obviously Flash is way stronger than Sonic, but Sonic has a stronger quote-unquote heart, which allowed him to break through the Genjutsu and whatever else we're going to see going forward. But after that, they kind of like waste no time and immediately go after Empty Void. And as they're trying to attack him, he suddenly like starts to warp reality, and he just leaves. Like, he is able to go outside of the perceivable universe. I mean, he says that this is the outside of the causality of the universe, and that parallel worlds branch out with each possibility, infinitely bubbling forth like foam, and he can like perceive them. Now, if you're confused by this sequence, that's okay, because we haven't seen this before. This is like new stuff, and he's able to do this because God gave him these powers, and also because he like sucked up the cosmic power that left Garo after he was defeated by Saitama. So I guess he got a buff from that, and he kind of has a similar understanding of energy and the universe that Garo did. But ultimately, it's all coming from God. And of course, Garo wasn't doing this stuff. This is wild. I mean, Garo knew how to like travel back in time, but this is something entirely different. And it makes me think that the whole Garo teaching Saitama to travel back in time, and Saitama going back in time to a previous timeline where everyone wasn't killed by his radiation, with that timeline still technically existing, that it was for a greater purpose, because all of this timeline stuff and parallel worlds is definitely going to come back into play, considering that it can be manipulated here even by Empty Void, so it can obviously be manipulated by God, meaning that God is probably acting in multiple timelines at once. I mean, I'm assuming he exists in a similar state that we see Empty Void here, outside of the causality of the universe. And going forward, this will probably be something that is very integral to the story. I would even like to see them go back to the universe that Saitama left, where everyone was killed by Garo's radiation. I mean, there were some people left, but it would be interesting to see what's going on there. But he looks down at like the timeline or the parallel world that he left Sonic and Flash in, and he says he can fold entire dimensions like bubbles and using special jutsu, and he starts doing this hand sign stuff. He kind of looks like somewhere between Naruto and Sukuna, and then he's like intervene from the outside, and he's about to come down with a huge slash that winds up being the dimension slash. So this explains how he's able to do that, because at the beginning of this arc we saw that the dimension slash came out of nowhere and almost one-shotted the Hero Association if Blast wasn't able to like protect it with his gravity sphere barrier thing. So it's like that's how he's able to do it. He just goes outside of the universe, perceives this dimension like a bubble, and then just attacks it from the outside, which is like, wow. I don't even know if this qualifies as above Dragon anymore. This has to be disaster level God stuff for sure, right? But the dimension slash like comes through trying to hit Flash and Sonic, and it looks like it kills Sonic at first, with Empty Void coming back into their world and trying to once again convince Flash to accept God's influence, saying like, hey, you can't refuse the temptation of the Holy Hand, referring to God. Become my arms and legs and we'll work together to exterminate humanity. I'll use my dimension slash from hyperspace to clean up the trash on the surface, further showing that this guy is probably legitimately disaster level God. But before he's able to hit Flash with the cube, our boy Blast comes back in and hits Empty Void with the gravity knuckle, just like he did in the previous version of this arc. So after he lands this punch, this is where the story is going to like officially continue from this point on with all new stuff, and we're no longer in retcon territory anymore. So he knocks Empty Void like pretty far away, but Empty Void immediately gets up and he's just angry at this. And Blast reveals how he was able to get here in time, because he's like, yeah, the wording of the challenge letter that Flash gave me seemed unnatural, so I pretended that I was going elsewhere and I just followed them from above. Also, Sonic is alive. I guess he was either saved by Blast or it was like again jutsu that he died. But then Blast is like, so both of you overcame the temptation of the cube, huh? Well done, you passed. So I guess Blast is like fully accepting him into his ranks. But going forward, I guess we're gonna see a full-blown battle between Blast and Empty Void here, because clearly Blast is the only guy that can fight him besides Saitama, and Saitama's not here. So we might see like an epic like hyperspace battle between these two. I really hope we do, at least a little bit. I mean, I'm not saying Blast needs to straight up defeat him here, but at least let's see a chapter worth of an insane battle. So the One Punch Man manga has returned after its 2-month hiatus, and we're going in a completely different direction than what we were in previously, because when we left off, we saw Blast with Flashy Flash and Sonic taking on Empty Void, who showed power unlike we had seen before. Like, he was straight up jumping out of the universe and going into this seemingly multiverse multiverse. And it ended with Blast coming to the rescue of Flashy Flash and Sonic, temporarily stifling Empty Void. And now with this new chapter, 202, which is the final retcon chapter, by the way, suddenly we're cutting over to Suiryu, and we're seeing that he becomes a pro hero in this chapter. Now, I'm not really sure what's going on chronologically after this. I don't know if we're gonna go back to the Empty Void versus Blast stuff after this chapter, or that's just where it ends. And either Blast, Sonic, or Flashy Flash will explain what happened later, which could be Blast did something to temporarily stop Empty Void, but he's still a threat looming out there, and they need to address that sooner or later. But I guess we're just gonna have to wait to see what happens. But in this chapter, we're seeing that Suiryu is being released from the hospital, which I guess is from the injuries he received taking on Goketsu and Bakuzan. Yeah, that was so long ago in real time, but in One Punch Man time, it wasn't really that long ago. And as he's coming out, he quickly takes care of this Tiger level threat, which I guess just establishes how powerful he is, which is, you know, kind of like S-class hero level for sure, maybe somewhere around Tank Top Master or something. We see that he's looking to become a hero like immediately because it was Saitama who inspired him through him saving Suiryu at the martial arts tournament. And I really like the way that this sequence plays out because Suiryu's like searching for the Hero Association essentially on Google, but the Neo Heroes are coming up instead of the Hero Association. And he's like, wow, the trend changed a lot while I was in the hospital, huh? Because we've seen recently that the Neo Heroes are on the come up, the new rival organization to the Hero Association. And Suiryu does want to join the Hero Association simply because Saitama is there, so it makes sense. But he's going to check out the Neo Heroes anyway just to see what's up, kind of like literally do a trial run of it, as he says that he can just quit after he joins, which is smart to be honest. And I'll go more into why Suiryu pretty much has to go to the Neo Heroes, but after looking through his phone, suddenly the head of the parent of the anteater monster that he had just killed lands next to him. And I'm pretty sure this is like in reference to when Saitama defeated Goketsu and threw his head back into the stadium, and it landed next to Suiryu, which kind of sparked his inspiration to become a hero once he saw what Saitama was capable of. But anyway, this is a demon level compared to the tiger level that Suiryu took out. And we're seeing the person who defeated it, and it's one of the Neo Heroes by the name of Webigaza. So we actually did kind of see this character before, but she was silhouetted when we saw our first glimpse of like who the top Neo Heroes were, like the alternate S-class, I guess you could say. And it turns out that she's kind of like this pop star who turned hero, and that apparently she had been reborn stronger. And her powers are interesting. She can like fly away like a Dragon Ball Z character, and I guess she has super strength as well. Now I know what she is and what gives her power, but it's not fully explained here yet. But I guess you could say that she's kind of like the Amai Mask of the Neo Heroes, given that they're both idols. Extremely powerful and seem to have like this dark side to them or some lingering secret, because we see in these panels that Webigaza, like for a brief moment, has to like chug this water, and then she goes back to like being cheerful. So after seeing Webigaza, Suiryu goes to the Neo Heroes to like apply for them, and as he's doing that, we see Suiko, his sister, go to the hospital only to find out that he had discharged and left her with the bill. We only see her for this instance in the chapter, but it's pretty important because she's gonna come back later on into this arc and kind of be like a big element of it. Then we see Suiryu get a power suit. This power suit is going to become pretty iconic to the Neo Heroes because you can see in the background that there's other people wearing them. First, however, it's not really powerful because Suiryu just busts through it, basically just flexing. But because he did that, he's forced to stay with the Neo Heroes to pay them back for the suit. So this is how Suiryu gets trapped into becoming a Neo Hero and not a member of the Hero Association like he initially wanted, to be able to work under Saitama or with him. This goes back to what I said about how Suiryu pretty much had to become a Neo Hero, and that's because in the webcomic, he is a Neo Hero. His story is also very different in the webcomic as well, since he was a relatively new character in that continuity. There was no martial arts tournament or anything like that in the webcomic, so he kind of just showed up at this point and became a Neo hero. He didn't really have any kind of history with Saitama to have this motivation that he has in the manga. So I like the way that one kind of blended those two stories together to make the one in the manga make more sense. And in the final panel here, we see him shaking hands with Metal Bat while he's being observed by Sitch. We found out that they both joined the Neo Heroes to kind of be undercovers for the Hero Association, essentially. So it's possible that they might get chummy with Suiryu and try to pull him over to the Hero Association eventually. But yeah, this is just the beginning of the Neo Heroes arc, essentially, or the Neo Heroes saga, I guess you could say, since there's a few other arcs we kind of have to get through before we get into the meat of this arc. So far for the Neo Heroes, we've seen that they have Child Emperor, Metal Bat, Excel, Raiden, this guy with the stitches on the side of his face, Webby Gaza, and now Suiryu. And then aside from that, we've got like 3 or 4 more silhouetted characters. So yeah, that's like the anti-S class, or the Neo Heroes equivalent of the S class. I'm not sure if they said what they are in the manga yet, but they do have like a title. And I'm not sure when we're really going to be addressing these characters in the next coming chapters, because there's a few storylines that could be going on aside from just what's happening with Blast and Empty Void. Alright, so the retcons are finally over and we are officially going into new chapters now, because we are continuing Suiryu joining the Neo Heroes. Meaning that, yeah, we're still not finding out what's going on with Empty Void, Blast, Flashy Flash, Sonic, and even Saitama. But it's fine, I'm sure we'll come back to them, maybe in a Tarantino-esque way later on. But anyway, we're seeing Suiryu meet up with the other Neo leaders in this chapter. They're like the Neo Heroes equivalent to the S-Class heroes in the Hero Association. And Suiryu is first meeting up with Child Emperor, who in the Neo Heroes is being referred to as Wild Emperor, Metal Bat, and Sekengar. The 3 of those are kind of like undercover in the Neo Heroes. They're not really defecting. They're kind of just there because they have to be, essentially, to figure out what's going on with the Neo Heroes, if they are legitimate or not, because obviously they sense that there's some nefarious deeds going on potentially behind the scenes. And we're seeing Darkshine here as well. Darkshine has joined the Neo Heroes, but I think he has legitimately joined them. Like, he's not part of this undercover group here, because Metal Bat is surprised when he sees him. But not only has Darkshine joined the Neo Heroes, he's retired from being a hero. And he's like very serious about it too. The war against the Monster Association seems to have fully broken Darkshine. Because you have to remember, going into that battle, he was, I guess, undefeated. And had never really even been tested up until that point. Because remember, we saw him fight Bug God, who... Man, a couple years ago, I made a video like thoroughly power scaling all of the demon levels in the series, and it turned out that he was by far the strongest demon in the series at that point. And Darkshine had literally one shot at him. And then after that, you know, he goes on to fight Garo and gets beat down for the first time. So that was like the beginning of his decline into fully breaking, and he had a momentary comeback against the Cadres later on. But once Vomited Fear Ugly came out, it was all over Darkshine, and he wound up getting like a big scar on his chest, which I guess the shirt he's wearing is supposed to reflect. And another interesting thing about like the cross star-shaped symbol on Darkshine's shirt is that it's also the same symbol on McCoy's eye patch. Now, I don't know if this is like the Neo Heroes like symbol or not, because when we see the Neo Heroes logo, it doesn't really have that star cross thing in it. So this could have more symbology behind it from one, possibly. But Darkshine goes on to reveal that he's like a trainer now to the Neo Heroes, considering that he's retired. And we see Ryumon here, one of the Neo leaders, laughing at Darkshine because of that. And he's like, looks like even someone with no guts can make it to the S-Class over there, huh? But that ain't how it works with the Neo leaders, so watch out, okay? And then after this, Metal Bat's like, oh, excuse me? And he like starts to walk up to Ryumon, and Sekengar stops him. He's like, don't, bro, it's not worth it. And Metal Bat like exhales. Oh, what a great sequence, because Metal Bat obviously is ride or die for Darkshine and most of the other S-Class heroes, especially the ones that he knows are actually like heroes and will actually go out there and put their life on the line. Like, he fought side by side with Darkshine in the final war against the Monster Association and the Cadres and all that stuff. And he knows how far Darkshine went. So when somebody like Ryumon says that, he's like, oh, excuse me? You know, this guy just fought in a freaking war to save the world. Like, he just saved you. It's like, where were you when we were fighting the Cadres? It's just, oh, such a great touch, this sequence. Really gives more life to these characters and showing that, yeah, they do care and they do have relationships here, even though they're not always explicitly, fully explored on the actual page. I also think this is setting up that Ryumon is going to fight Metal Bat. And it's very likely might be Metal Bat's final opponent of this arc because they are like a contrast and a parallel to each other. And you also see that with a few of the Neo leaders here, like Wavy Gaza, which we'll get into. We talked about her in the previous chapter. She's supposed to be like the competitor to a My Mask. Ryumon is kind of like Metal Bat. They're both like, you know, the Bancho-y types, Yakuza adjacent, if you will, more so Ryumon than Metal Bat. And then Wavy Gaza is like the idol turned hero, like My Mask. And then we'll see at the end of the chapter, Raiden is obviously supposed to represent the Darkshine of the Neo heroes. But it's not like that for all of them. There's just some characters who reflect others here. But speaking of Ryumon, I think this is the first time we're like fully introduced to him, right? Because before that, we only had really seen him just talk. And McCoy explains that he's the boss of the Ryumon gang, which I guess is like a Yakuza thing of this world. And it has 400 members. And that's fine, I guess, because he has been involved in organized crime, but they're just looking the other way and letting him join the Neo Heroes because he's turning the other cheek. He wants to be good now, as he says. And he says, I educate those under me with a strong hand, you know? So you might want to watch your attitude towards your seniors, referring to Metal Bat here. And that raises the question, of course. So this guy is a Neo leader, and he's straight up talking crap to Darkshine's face. Darkshine, freaking huge, by the way. I think he's grown in size. He seems like even bigger in this chapter somehow. But it begs the question, like, how strong is Ryumon? And I'm just going to say right now, we have no idea. Not even in the webcomic currently do we really know how strong Ryumon is. So your guess is as good as mine. I'm just going to take a guess and say that he's probably around the level of Metal Bat. Just taking a guess. Again, I have no idea. But it's like, where have guys this strong been? I guess they're just chilling in random parts of the One Punch Man world and they just don't want to join the heroes. I mean, we've seen that is the case. Like the Council of Swordsmen and the martial artists. There are really powerful guys out there that don't necessarily want to be heroes. But I do think that Ryumon is going to be like the full-blown bad guy, like non-turning heel of the Neo heroes here. And I don't think that is the case for all of them. I think some of them are going to eventually turn good or join, you know, the heroes from the Hero Association in whatever battle they're fighting. And that's Axel, the next Neo leader that we're getting introduced to here, which we were introduced to before. He was actually one of the first. He's the leader of a vigilante group called the Hunters, who actively take down monsters. Also don't know how strong this guy is, but I assume he's pretty strong if they're making him a Neo leader despite, and I just don't think it's because he has like 47 people who can join, although that might be the case because this next guy in Felsenave is kind of like a cult leader, and he has like 3 million followers. It's like, is he strong? I don't know. And then we have Zayditz, who is like this really rich, powerful backer of the Neo heroes. He's also a Neo leader. But apparently he's not strong because Sekengar is like, you're just going to put this guy on the front lines? Isn't it dangerous? And then Zayditz is like, nah, there's no need to concern. I allocate most of the budget to my equipment. So he has good tech. I assume with all of that money, he has to have tech comparable to like Child Emperor maybe? I don't know. Is that like exclusive to his intellect along with Metal Knight? Can you just buy that from someplace? But the jury is out with them. But Webby Gaza, we're also reintroduced to in this chapter. We know that she's really strong. She's definitely S-Class level from what we've seen in the previous chapter. And we're also hearing that after a 6-month hiatus where she endured various human experiments, she is returned as an enhanced human. So it's like, what was that? What did they do to her? You know, we'll find out eventually, but she is one of the rare examples of us hearing about this. Like, this doesn't typically happen to people, you know, in this world. We have, like, Genos, of course, and then we have, like, the House of Evolution people. And then I'm sure there's a few select others. But I also like the way that they describe her here. It's like, as you know, Wavy Gyaza is a hugely popular idol singer who has been riding high and has overwhelming support from teenagers, and anyone who speaks ill will of her will not go unchallenged by her crazy enthusiastic fans. Like, I guess she's supposed to be like the Taylor Swift of this world or something. But then at the end of the chapter, we see Darkshine trying to introduce himself to Wavy Gyaza, and then suddenly Raiden comes in. And he's just towering over Darkshine, who I just thought got even bigger in this chapter, and it shows you that Raiden is even bigger than that. I wonder if Raiden is even bigger than Boros. So Darkshine is 7'8.5", and Boros is 7'10.5". I thought Boros was taller than that. So judging from this, it looks like Raiden might be even bigger than Boros. Like, Raiden might be 9 feet tall or something. I don't know. But he's like, are you really not going to fight? Just staring down Darkshine. Darkshine looking kind of concerned here. So this raises the question of like, oh wow, how strong is Raiden if he's like almost sunning Darkshine here? Because while Darkshine, you know, did get messed up, has some serious PTSD and retired, he was still one of the strongest S-Class heroes. Like, I'm pretty sure he could destroy Ryumon if they fought. I'm just taking a guess. For Raiden, I don't know. But maybe we'll find out in the next chapter. So we're seeing the confrontation between Raiden and Darkshine. This was set up in the previous chapter where Darkshine seemed almost maybe intimidated by Raiden. We're also getting some more exposition on Raiden here. So we found out that he's like the super sumo Yokozuna, like the world champion of sumo wrestling, essentially. But he fights in a league where guys have to be over 3 meters tall and over 400 kilograms to join. So that's like minimum 9'8" and then 880 pounds or something. We were talking about this in the previous review. Like, is Raiden bigger than Boros? And yes, he definitely is. He's way bigger than Boros, actually, because Boros is surprisingly only 7'10.5". So he couldn't even join that sumo league if he wanted. Darkshine can't even join either. But in this league, Raiden went undefeated for like 700 matches, and allegedly his combat ability surpasses even S-Class heroes. So what does that mean? Does that mean that he's like above Dragon? I don't think so. I think it's kind of hyperbole. Raiden is pretty strong and he is definitely S-Class level, but there's no way he's surpassing it. And I say that because he straight up gets into a test of strength with Darkshine here. He kind of forces it on him, of course. And it looks like he's kind of imposing his will on Darkshine, maybe even overpowering him a little bit. But to be honest, I don't really think he is that much, because Darkshine surprisingly keeps his composure pretty well here. And I say surprisingly because in the webcomic, Darkshine was a little more submissive in this sequence. But in the manga continuity here, he's not looking so bad. I mean, yeah, he's not doing great because Raiden kind of feels bad for him. He looks at him and he's like, I didn't mean to scare you, bro. You can stop. He's like, maybe you're not in your best condition right now. Or perhaps I have surpassed the peak. It's definitely the former, Darkshine not being in his best condition because he has PTSD coming off of the Monster Association War. But I don't think this means that Raiden is stronger than Darkshine. But anyway, these two guys bust in here. Mars Leo and Coco, or Solitude. And they're what is described as Neo Leader candidates. Like, they were pretty strong, they were being considered to be Neo Leaders, but they didn't necessarily make the cut. So they're in this candidate level, which I guess is like high A-class equivalent. But these guys are just quite literally jobbers because they bust in here very recklessly, and their whole purpose is to just show how much stronger everyone else is compared to them. Because Coco like uses his bionic eye to analyze Wavy Gyaza, and he finds out that her body modification ratio is over 71%, which apparently is incredible. Like, Cyborgification, which is this process is being called here, and this is going to become very prevalent throughout this arc, but over 60% is extremely dangerous, and success cases are rare, so she's 71%. Not really sure how much Coco is here, but obviously he's not 71 because he finds that extremely impressive. So we're finding out what happened to Wavy Gyaza. She underwent Cyborgification. I mean, she probably had some other stuff done to her too. It's possible possible that she had some kind of Esper surgery done, because we found out that that's a thing now. But at least it's being confirmed here that part of the reason why she's so incredibly powerful is because she's 71% cyborg. And it also makes you think, like, what is Genesis percentage? Because he's pretty much just a brain at this point, I assume. I don't really think he has much humanity left to him other than that, so he's got to be in the 90s. But anyway, Mars Leo like starts crashing out for some reason, and he's like shadow boxing and then acts like he's accidentally punching Darkshine, but he does it on purpose because, I don't know, he's stupid. And he literally breaks his hand and wrist punching Darkshine. Like, his bone punctures through. It's just showing you, like, yeah, this is how strong Darkshine is. He did just kind of get played a little bit by Raiden, but he still is a god amongst everyone else that is an S-class. Then Suiryu comes up and he's like, hey, you know, why don't you just stop, man? Don't you get it that you're outclassed? You should go home. And then Mars Leo and Coco obviously get upset at that, and they start attacking Suiryu. And yeah, he like no diff parries them. So like I said, these two guys only exist to job, which is fine. You need that every now and then. So we've established that Wavy Gyaza, pretty powerful, 71% cyborg modified. Darkshine, still one of the strongest S-class heroes. And Suiryu, pretty strong. He could just take these two A-class implied level guys, no problem, and just no diff avoid them. So yeah, he's obviously S-class level, as we already knew from the Super Fight tournament. But aside from that, this meeting is going to continue in the next chapter because there's still two more Neo leaders that we need to be introduced to. One of them we actually already saw as a silhouette. It's this person right here. They're going to be introduced to the next chapter for sure. And then we're going to get introduced to some new characters that we didn't even expect to be a thing. And they're really going to shake up the power scale. I'm really excited to see what they look like in the manga, actually, because they're pretty important characters, to be honest. And then after that, like I said, there's one last Neo leader that we will be introduced to after the previous one, and that will probably be the cliffhanger. And I won't go into who it is, of course, but I'll just say it is the most hyped member of the Neo heroes. Might be introduced to this character in the next chapter or the chapter after that, but it's going to be a pretty big deal when they are revealed. And of course, we can't forget about what's going on with Blast, Flashy Flash, Sonic, and Empty Void. Technically, they're still in the middle of their battle, maybe? I don't really know what the timelines are right now, but that still has to be resolved unless the story just kind of skips over it and we just get a verbal recount of what happened once we catch up with Flashy Flash, maybe? And then wherever Saitama is, kind of unknown at this point. So on the cover of the new One Punch Man chapter, we see Saitama standing in front of this man-made cave. And I think that this is really important because it could be showing us where this series is leading, which of course is Saitama facing off against God. And that's because I think Saitama might be standing in front of the gate of the Celestial Rock Cave, which connects to the dimension where God is currently hiding. So to explain what this is a little difficult because it technically doesn't exist, at least currently. Although a couple months ago, it definitely did exist. However, the chapter where it's explained was changed or retconned and it was removed. And since then, it hasn't been mentioned again. So it's kind of like in this lore limbo. However, I do think that it is going to come back for sure. And to explain that, I need to at first fully explain what this thing is. So before the retcons of the ninja arc that we just finished, Blast originally told Saitama and his group was the reason that he wanted to revert his former teammate Empty Void back into a human is because he's the only person with the ability to open the gate of the Celestial Rock Cave that connects to the dimension where God hides. That's why we see Blast running these experiments in the Hero Association on the martial artists turned monsters from the tournament. We still see him doing that in the current continuity. However, he hasn't mentioned the reason why he is truly doing it yet, with trying to harness the ability to open the gate of the Celestial Rock Cave. So if Saitama is standing in front of it, that means that it will eventually come back into play. But of course, there's a chance that this isn't that, and it's just something else. If it's not the gated celestial rock cave, then it's something else that is tied to God for sure. And then finally, I think there's like a little Easter egg here, because if we look off to the left of Saitama, I think that's the shadow of God standing over him, meaning that Saitama is technically looking up at God. Now let me also mention that this isn't like a canonical sequence. It hasn't happened yet. It could be a glimpse into the future, but I more so think that this is just a stagnant view of what could be or what is to come. So yeah, I don't think this is like a coincidence. That's definitely like a shadow, and it's supposed to represent God, because like I said, it's hinting towards the final battle of the series. But anyway, on to the chapter itself, because it's picking up from the end of the previous, where we saw Suiryu in this light scuffle against Mars, Leo, and Coco, two Neo Leader candidates. And he winds up knocking Coco into a new Neo Leader being revealed here by the name of A. Apparently he's like a hitman with a special A-class bounty on his head, and his combat skills are effective against monsters too. Also, he has like this special condition of joining as to where he's always going to be under surveillance. So this character is different. He clearly looks like he is evil, and he most likely is. It also seems like he's maybe achieving the bare minimum to become a Neo Leader here, since he has a quote-unquote special A-class bounty. I don't know, special A-class, is that like above A-class, not quite S-class? Because I'm pretty sure Sonic has an S-class bounty, right? And if Puri Puri Prisoner wasn't an S-class hero, he for sure would have one as well. So the fact that they're just not outright saying that he has an S-class bounty is probably one trying to tell us how strong this guy is. Just taking a guess. And like I said, he looks evil. He's probably going to be one of the Neo Leaders that doesn't turn good at the end of the arc and winds up having to fight against one of the S-class heroes or something. Similar to what we were talking about with Ryumon. But this guy essentially joined the Neo Heroes to escape being arrested, and they're like going along with it too, saying that like they could show how they changed him into a role model. But going further into the chapter, we see that Child Emperor figures out where the Neo Heroes are getting all their money from. So he figures it's from at least 3 different sources. Money laundering from illegal transactions of criminal organizations, such as coming from Ryumon. He's kind of like a Yakuza type guy here. Then we have tax evasion cover-ups for wealthy individuals and religious leaders, which is hilarious. That's referring to Infelsinate and Zaditz. And then human experimentation on heroes and the marketing of its results, referring to Webigaza, who's like a big pop star, being turned into a cyborg, and then all of the publicity that got. So this is just showing how they became so big so quickly. But Child Emperor and Second Gar are of course paying attention to this, because along with Metal Bat, they were sent to the Neo Heroes kind of like undercover, still being with the Hero Association, trying to figure out what makes them tick and what their true motives are. Then we have this pretty cool sequence where Darkshine is talking to Second Gar, Child Emperor, and Metal Bat. And here's where it's fully being confirmed that he's retiring and just being a full-time trainer. I think I mentioned this like 2 or 3 chapters ago, and I thought that he already said it, but I guess he didn't. So I'm sorry if I spoiled anyone, but yeah, he's like fully retired now due to the PTSD that he received from the Monster Association War. And Second Gar and Metal Bat are supportive to Darkshine, of course, but Child Emperor is more so cold to him, saying that like, how can someone who became a traitor because they lost confidence really guide others with such a weak mindset? Now, I don't know if this is Child Emperor like playing the part of Wild Emperor, you know, like being undercover for the other Neo Leaders and McCoy to see, or if this is truly how he feels. But Metal Bat continues to support him. He's like, look, I can't really express things that great because, you know, I'm like an idiot bancho, but I think the real you has a presence that puts people at ease. Because of that, they'll follow you. That won't change whether you're a hero or a trainer, right? Anyway, if you're going to challenge yourself with something new, I support you. So do your best, okay, Darkshine? So that kind of cheers Darkshine up, but still he's ultimately, you know, crippled by his PTSD. But then we come to the end of the chapter here, and we see McCoy introducing these 2 security guards by the name of Destro and Element. They came here because of Mars, Leo, and Coco attacking Suiryu. And McCoy says that they're agents in charge of the security of Neo Tower and dealing with those who violate the rules. And it seems like they used to be mercenary. And that's where the chapter ends. So these guys are pretty important. Also, really interesting that Element is a woman woman. It was difficult to tell in the webcomic version, but now we know for sure. Now, for a couple years now, I've had a theory on who these two are, but I can't talk about it because there hasn't been enough information released about them yet. But in the next chapter, we'll probably be able to talk about that. But I'll just say that, first of all, they're presented as being pretty strong if they are the security of Neo Tower and dealing with those who violate the rules, meeting like Neo Leader candidates and the Neo Leaders themselves, I suppose, right? And they used to be mercenaries. So yeah, if you're not familiar with these two, let me know if you have any theories about them in the comments, or if you do know, just let me know what you think about their manga counterparts. So in the new chapter, we're getting introduced to Blast's son by the name of Blue. This is pretty wild. We had no idea that Blast had a son or even any relatives, but now we do, and he's the freaking leader of the Neo Heroes. And he's also 16 years old. So we've got ourselves a Shonen MC inserted into the story here. So I'll go more into Blue at the end of the chapter because there's, quite a few other things that happen here, such as us finding out why these new enforcers of the Neo Heroes are so powerful. Because in the previous chapter, we saw these Neo Leader candidates, Mars, Leo, and Coco, bust into the Neo Leader meeting trying to make a name for themselves. As they mention here, they were trying to take out one of the leaders to become one themselves, but that obviously didn't work out. They just made fools of themselves, and that caused these enforcers, or the security guards, to come in, Eramin and Destro. And Coco is just terrified of these guys, and it's because he can see their body modification rate. Throughout this arc, it's been mentioned that cyborgification is more of a common thing than we thought, and that more people than Genos are cyborgs, such as Wavy Gyaza, one of the Neo leaders. She apparently has a body modification rate of 71%, which is incredible. Normally a cyborg doesn't even achieve half of that. So Coco is terrified of these new security guards because they are both 94 and 95% body modified. So as we've seen, Wavy Gyaza is pretty powerful. She is definitely S-class level, and she's 71%. And these guys are over 20% more modified than her, meaning that they're essentially 20% stronger than she is. So does that mean that these guys are above Dragon? I have no idea, but I'll just say that they are extremely powerful. And it also brings me back to what we were talking about before with what's Genos' percentage? He's gotta be 94, 95, maybe even higher than that, because I think he's only a brain at this point. Speaking of brain, there's a theory that I want to go into with Eramin and Destro, but I feel it's too soon to start throwing this on people because there's really not enough evidence to support it. It was easier to support this theory in the webcomic, but I guess we'll just wait until more stuff is revealed in the manga continuity. But it also goes into what we're going to be talking about next anyway, because Wavy Gyaza kind of falls over, almost fainting, and she says the Child Emperor that the main server in her brain got connected in the modification surgery, and lately she's been having the sensation of someone reaching and probing around in her. Then she looks at Child Emperor super creepily. This is, setting up that there is a dark force behind the Neo Heroes, and also whoever is going about with all of this cyborgification stuff. There is a main server out there, and it's connected to these individuals. So, obviously the implication is that they could just take them over at any point and turn them into drones, which, for sure is foreshadowing what is going to happen in this arc. It's not a spoiler. It's kind of just inevitable in my opinion. And I think Eramin and Destro are connected to this quote-unquote main server. Then we have this little interesting interaction between Metal Bat and Ryumon, because Metal Bat's explaining why he joined the Neo Leaders. It's vague, but it's to become a hero his little sister could be proud of. I mean, she could have been proud of him in the Hero Association, so I guess the implication here is that he's putting forth that he doesn't trust them anymore or something, which I don't think he's outright said to everyone, which is, not the case. That would just be his cover, since he is here undercover essentially with the Hero Association. But Ryumon's well, in other words, he's an idiot. And Metal Bat surprisingly laughs this off. He's you ain't wrong, but it seems like being an idiot rather than subtle is better suited for this line of work. So I'll take that as a compliment, senpai. Also really interesting calling Ryumon senpai here. I mean, sure Ryumon is much older than Metal Bat, because Metal Bat's only like 17 or 18 or something, and Ryumon's probably, close to 30 maybe. And Metal Bat's like, seems like I'll get along with you. And Ryumon kind of looks at him puzzled. And this goes back to another thing that we were talking about before, and I think that Metal Bat and Ryumon were being set up as like final arc opponents, but I think this just reinforces it even more so. Like when the big inevitable hero civil war happens and all, chaos is breaking loose, these two will definitely be fighting at the end of it. But anyway, we're coming into the end of the chapter here, and the final member of the Neo Leaders is being introduced, and he is the leader, like we talked about. It's Blue, who's apparently the freaking son of Blast. And he's also only 16 years old, but he's still so powerful and accomplished that he is the leader of the Neo Heroes. So the way that McCoy introduces him here kind of implies that Blue had part in setting up the Neo Heroes. I don't think he was the sole force behind it, obviously, but he was probably one of the founders of it. And him talking about wanting to establish the purpose of showing real heroes to the world, I assume he has beef with Blast and the Hero Association, because otherwise he would have just joined them. And he wouldn't be saying things like showing real heroes to the world. So since Blast has been MIA for a long time, especially the last 3 years, dealing with God stuff, I'm assuming that if Blue is actually his biological son, then he hasn't really been in Blue's life that much, right? So Blue probably has some resentment to that. And I'm also assuming that Blue doesn't know about the God stuff and Blast dealing with it. Also, Blue has the same eyes as Blast. So this possibly means that they are legitimately related. And it's not just like, some lie or someone posing as Blast's son, or he was like a cyborg made to act like he is. I think that he is legitimately Blast's son at this point. Could be wrong, but it seems like he is. And then of course that raises the question of who's Blue's mom? I have no idea. We probably won't ever know, unless it ultimately is all revealed that Tatsumaki and Fubuki are related to Blast too, then maybe that will come into play. But anyway, in the very end of the chapter, after Blue's revealed, we see Blast punching Empty Void in the face, coming back to this fight possibly, because, it left off with them kind of getting their fight started, with Blast helping Flashy Flash and Sonic against him, but then it cut away and we went to this Neo Leader stuff. So we might be coming back to this and seeing what the end result of this fight is, which I assume Empty Void will escape from. Or at least I hope so. It's too soon in the series for him to be ultimately defeated or reverted back into a human. So Blast is somehow even stronger than what we initially thought, because we're seeing more displays of his power in this chapter as he takes on Empty Void. We haven't seen this fight in a little bit because it cut away from this, going into the Neo Leaders reveal stuff, which we just got off of with the previous chapter, where we saw the leader of the Neo Heroes claiming to be Blast's son. And now we're going back to where chapter 201 left off, with Empty Void showing up to where Sonic and Flashy Flash was, attempting to kill Sonic and convert Flashy Flash over to God using the cube, until Blast showed up at the nick of time, knocking Empty Void away and protecting Flashy Flash and Sonic. Now, coming into this chapter, we're seeing the continuation where Blast is going back to Empty Void and just taking it to him, hitting him with like a nice right shovel hook encased in his gravity knuckle, which is like his signature move, and they have a little back and forth until Blast just grabs him and he's like, I waited 15 years for this, This is because, 15 years ago is when they initially fought. And I think it was 20 years ago, 5 years even before that, when they were like teammates, they were like friends, and Empty Void was still a human. And they were going around looking for the cubes, trying to stop God, or whatever they thought the threat coming from them was. And when Empty Void found a cube on his own, he wound up being tricked by God and becoming what he is now. And then 5 years after that, 15 years ago, when Blast wound up fighting Empty Void after I guess they met up again, grievously wounded him and put him in like a 15-year coma to which he needed to recover. And then only recently did he just come out of that. But anyway, Blast is like, so to move into higher dimensions, you need to form a seal with both hands, right? And then he constrains his hands with like 2 gravity bubbles or whatever these are. So what Blast is referring to is what we saw Empty Void do back in chapter 201. Like as Flashy Flash and Sonic were trying to attack him, he simply just left reality and went into what he he says is outside of causality of the universe. And as he does this, he sees like infinite parallel worlds branching out. And that's because apparently all of these dimensions are folded like bubbles using this quote unquote special jutsu that he has, where he has to do like straight up Naruto hand signs to activate it. And this is how he's able to do that massive dimension slash that we're going to see at the end of this chapter, because he can attack the folded dimension from the outside of causality. Yeah, pretty wild stuff, I know. As for all this hand sign stuff, I think this might be whatever is inherent to Empty Void, and God amplifies his abilities so that he can, you know, go out of space-time. I mean, maybe he could do some cool stuff before God power up, but I think that he can only go so far because of God. Kind of like, you know, taking steroids or whatever. But as Blast has him held down, he says that he's spent 15 years perfecting his skills to restrain him without killing him. Because, you know, like we said last time they fought, he grievously wounded him. You know, he could have easily died if he wasn't lucky enough to, I don't know, scurry away or go into that recovery capsule. But Blast is restraining him because he needs to take him back to the Hero Association so that he can run those experiments on him to revert him back to being a human. Blast hasn't revealed this in the new post-retcon continuity of this arc. Previously, he said that Empty Void has like this innate exclusive ability to open the portal where God is hiding. And I think that that still is the case. He just has yet to say it again. Empty Void still tries to attack Blast while he's restrained, hitting him with like these Homeless Emperor-esque light spheres. Blast actually refers to these things as the light of divine power, which I'm pretty sure Homeless Emperor's light spheres were referred to that as well. And we see that Blast is able to manipulate these. Like he takes them, converts them into a dark color, and then just sends them into his wormhole. And then he says that it's essentially useless against him. And I'll go more into this after this sequence because he makes another really interesting comment about them. But as he's holding down Empty Void, this is pretty much the end. Like he's going to take him back to the Hero Association at this point. Sonic suddenly throws two kunais at Empty Void's head, and Blast realizes it at the last second and kicks him away. He goes, "What the heck are you doing?" And Sonic's like, "Why don't you just kill him?" Obviously, Sonic doesn't understand the nuance of the situation. But in this distraction, Empty Void like starts sucking in the gravity sphere on his chest, and this like pulls the gravity orbs on his hands further down, exposing his fingers, freeing them to activate his ability to jump outside of the causality of the universe. And Blast is like, "My power of darkness, which seals the power of light. What's going on?" And this kind of just opened a whole new can of worms for me. Because, you know, as I've been talking about for a couple of years now, One Punch Man puts forth the notion that the light is good and the dark is bad, right? Sun versus moon, kind of like the same thing in One Piece. It's not that black and white most of the time. So Blast saying that his power of darkness, which is a power that seals light, confuses me since Blast is a good guy, you know? And God is actually the one here that is supplying the power of divine light. We already talked about how God is like a false god. He wants to appear as though he is benevolent, although he is obviously not. And we still have no idea how Blast got his powers or even what they are, other than, you know, like gravity manipulation and him talking about power of darkness. We've also seen a parallel between him and Homeless Emperor before with their spheres, colored light and dark. And I could keep going on and on speculating about what's going on, but I'm just going to waste your time at that point. Hopefully the next chapter will get more information as to what's going on with Blast, but this one gave us more questions. But coming to the end of the chapter, Empty Void, like I said, slashes, hits that dimension slash, cutting like an 18-mile long slash in the ground. And as we see on the side, Blast once again able to save Flashy Flash and Sonic. I don't know if this is the end of their fight, but I hope it is so that Empty Void can just go away, recover, then, you know, he'll come back and be one of the endgame villains for our heroes here. Hey guys, I'm back. We'll talk more about that at the end of the video, but first we have to talk about this new One Punch Man chapter because Blast is getting killed? Question mark? Not really sure, but it is a possibility because he's got his arm cut off in this chapter and then he's getting like slashed up. This is by far the most damage we've ever seen Blast take, and also just the furthest he's ever been pushed. But let's talk about how we got to this point. So in the previous chapter, we saw that Blast was continuing his fight against Empty Void, and it got to the point of where he had him dead to rights. I mean, he wasn't going to kill him because he's trying to bring him into the Monster Association so that they can run experiments on him to reverse his monsterization. But as he was holding Empty Void down with like these gravity orbs, Sonic tried to execute Empty Void right there and then. While Blast was like deflecting it, in that split second, Empty Void was able to escape and launch off a Dimension Slash, which is where the previous chapter left off. And I thought Empty Void was kind of just gonna peace out at that point, but no, he's still there. He is not afraid of this fight. But after he returns from like kicking Blast, his face like breaks, like the monster thing that he had going on, and he looks kind of like his older human self again. But he has like the cosmic fear aesthetic to him, which, you know, denotes that he has been given power by God. And he says something really interesting here, where he says, I had a feeling something was off ever since I absorbed that avatar's power. It seems like he was a failed creation, granted power by God while secretly holding a dark nature that defies it. And then he calls him something I can't really say on YouTube, but we see like Prime Garo in this sequence, probably my favorite character in the series. Also, Murata forgot to color in his right eye, but it's fine. The guy's overworked anyway. And then finally, he's like, however, as a result, your power of darkness that counters God no longer works on me. So it seems like Empty Void possibly inherited some of Garo's will? And I say that because, like, at first when we saw Empty Void, he looked like a monster guy. But now it's like broken off, similar to how Garo's monster form or cosmic fear stuff was breaking off. And it seems like he might be regaining a little bit of his humanity, possibly, or just he seems more cognizant. Before he was kind of like berserker rage, but now he's more calm and collected. And I'll get more into him inheriting Garo's will because it's mentioned by Blast at the end of the chapter. But they're ready to fight again. This is like round 3 or 4 at this point, and Blast is like serious, I guess, now. And he like takes off his glasses and throws them to Flashy Flash, and it makes you wonder, like, why does Blast even wear those glasses in the first place? He's kind of like a cosmic deity. I didn't think his eyes could be compromised. So they start going at it again, and once again, Blast has the upper hand on Empty Void, hitting him with his portal punches. He actually hits him with this really cool combo that reminds me of Hoopa Unbound. Some of you are like, whoa, I haven't heard that in a while. Yeah, I know. I think he was only in like the Sun and Moon games. Maybe they have him in like the new games now. But I wonder if one saw Hoopa Unbound's hyperspace fury move and was like, wow, I'm gonna put that on Blast. But as he's taking it to Empty Void like figures out what Blast is doing. He's kind of getting lazy with his tactics in a way. He keeps trying to attack Empty Void from behind, essentially. It's like every time he's trying to do that. So Empty Void is like, all right, bet I'm gonna snap my bones in reverse and then sneak attack you when you think you're the one sneak attacking me. Yeah, that's right. That's what he's doing in this sequence. He's breaking his bones backwards and like inverting himself. And this works. It allows him to cut off Blast's right arm, which is crazy. This is Blast we're talking about. Characters like this don't get maimed. They're just too powerful, you know? Or at least they were. But now with the whole cosmic power creep, not even Blast is safe anymore. But there was good reason as to why Empty Void did this, because he's like, you can't teleport without putting your fists together, can you? Your desperate tactic of using a boring magic trick to target my blind spot is disappointing. That confirms that Blast needs to do this to activate his portals or singularities or whatever, which I guess is supposed to be a parallel to Empty Void as well, because he needs to do his Naruto stuff to activate some of his abilities. So Blast is bound by this motion for some reason. And it makes you wonder, is the suit also playing part into Blast's power? And this goes back to my theory about how it's possible that Blast's powers and abilities can be learned because of his other Guardians of the Galaxy people that he has on his team to go against God. And it seems like maybe they can all kind of do similar things, and they all have a very similar kind of uniform thing going on. But going further, Empty Void is like, can't dodge the Dimension Slash anymore. So at this point, I'm just gonna go around destroying a whole bunch of cities while you just stand there and watch. And Blast is like, you're still bad at lying. Your eyes are shifty. And Empty Void's like, what? And Blast is like, if you were the same as you were 15 years ago when we first fought, then you would have just cut off my head immediately. But now you've absorbed Garo's factor. God's brainwashing is starting to wear off. And now we're coming full circle, because like I said, does this mean that he inherited Garo's will? I mean, it says like, Garo's factor. So it seems like the power that God gave to Garo kind of like mutated inside of him, and his own spirit, essence, DNA, factor fused with it or imprinted in it somehow. And then when Empty Void, you know, snuck in there and sucked it all up, he got a piece of Garo now, which, as Empty Void puts it, holding a dark nature that defies the power of God. So I guess this means that Empty Void is now not 100% compromised by God. And then I guess there's still a little string of humanity left in there that Blast can grab onto maybe, but it seems like it's all for naught, because now we're coming to the very last panel where he is just sliced up, and it's possible that this was like a delayed effect maybe. Like maybe Empty Void already slashed up Blast like right after he cut off his arm, and if not, then he immediately did it in between these two panels when Blast was talking about the Garo factors. Either way, this is the most damage we've ever seen Blast take, but I don't think this is going to kill him because it's battle manga and we see this stuff happen all the time. I mean, I'm not going to spoil Jujutsu Kaisen, but I'm just going to say there's a whole bunch of characters that go through the same thing that Blast is going through right here, and they wind up surviving. So if Blast can't survive this, it's kind of disappointing. And also, I expect Blast to die in like the last arc of the series, or maybe the arc before the last one. He just seems like he's bound to die, but just not right now. So we've got another crazy feat from Saitama, because he is straight up breaking reality once again in the new chapter. So as we saw before, Empty Void can like jump out of the causality of the universe and slash at it directly with what he calls a dimensional slash from his dimensional blade. And when he does it in this chapter, Saitama just straight up stops it with like his index finger and thumb, and then pulls Empty Void from outside of the universe back down into it. Pretty wild stuff, but of course we'll get to that because there's other stuff that happens. I had to kind of skip around to get to the juicy stuff in the beginning of the video. You know, TikTok generation, attention span, and all that stuff. But anyway, coming off the previous chapter, Empty Void was able to get the upper hand on Blast and slashed him up and took off his right hand as well. He's wasting no time and just speed blitzes his sword right into Blast's chest. And he makes some small talk with Blast, saying that he heard that he had become the #1 S-class hero, but then he says that he's always been irresponsible, preaching ideals and bringing disasters to those around him. Pretty interesting that he says that, and we'll get more into that towards the end of the chapter because I think I know what that means. And going more into that, he's like, so who have you managed to protect, huh? You have a kid, don't you? The kid he's referring to is actually the leader of the Neo Heroes, Blue, who we were introduced a couple chapters back. This straight up confirms that he is in fact the son of Blast, and he's like not lying about it, just in case anybody was curious. But as he's gloating here, Flashy Flash finally comes in, trying to help Blast by taking off Empty Void's head. But of course, he is easily able to avoid this because Empty Void is at a level way higher than Flashy Flash. At this point, I think it's safe to say that he is a disaster level god being, and Flashy Flash at best is like above dragon. Then in retaliation, he just slashes Flashy Flash. Realistically, he could have just Sukuna'd him, but you know, he's not supposed to die at this point in the story, if, you know, die at all ever. But then Sonic comes in with his Windblade kick, but for some reason Empty Void just decides to hop out of the causality of the universe. You know, like his special jutsu thing that he can do. And his rationale is like, yeah, I would have enjoyed tormenting you directly rather than slicing you from afar, but that will do. I'm done with this nonsense. I guess he's just speed running to kill them, even though he could have just did it there. But I get it. We need to have this sequence play out the way that it does because of what happens. So yeah, as expected, he hops out and then tries to end them all with one quick dimension slash. But this is where Saitama comes in because he is just randomly near them in the forest. And he's with Monako and he's like, what's this? Just holding a freaking dimensional blade with his index finger and thumb. And Empty Void's like, what? There's nothing that can stop the tip of the dimension blade, which cuts through space itself. So that's fascinating, and we kind of knew that, but it's just, you know, of course, nice to be confirmed here. But it also brings me back to Sukuna, because as I said, Empty Void could have just easily Sukuna'd Flashy Flash, which I mean just, you know, cut through him like butter. Sukuna is that, you know, towards the end of the series, he gains this ability to where he can cut through space itself. And that's like the ultimate move in Jujutsu Kaisen. There's like no one that can stop that. But as we see, that's not really anything to Saitama. And then it made me wonder like, oh, it would be really cool to see Saitama do this to Sukuna. Like if Sukuna fired off a world-cutting slash at him and he just grabbed it with his index finger and thumb, I assume Sukuna would just submit at that point. Not like a coward, but just accepting that, oh, this guy is God and I am not. I accept a honorable death. But Empty Void, on the other hand, not looking for an honorable death here, and he just tries another dimensional slash against Saitama, but he just grabs that one too. And then he pulls Empty Void from outside of the universe back down into it and slams him into the ground. Amazing sequence. This is also an homage to the original sequence from the webcomic. Very different continuity, of course. Empty Void was way depowered in that version, and we don't really see him do anything. Saitama kind of just off-screens him, and he winds up in a human-shaped hole the way that he is in the manga as well. But then we see that Saitama has Empty Void's two-dimensional blades. So what's going to happen with these things is I'm pretty sure he's going to give one to Flashy Flash and one to Sonic. And this will be their pathway to their next power-up. Since Empty Void refers to these things as dimension blades, it's very possible he might need them to use that technique. So it's possible that Flashy Flash and Sonic may use these things to either eventually get to the cosmic level of power or be able to defend against beings on that level. But speaking of them, they go right after Empty Void after he loses the blades. And he's like, oh, okay, well, check this out. And then he does his little jutsu, but Blast is like, nah, you're not getting away. And he puts his left hand through one of his portals and it connects with his severed right hand on the ground so that he can activate his singularity. Awesome sequence here. And as he's doing that, he like permeates into Empty Void because apparently he's trying to fuse with him, which I didn't know Blast can do this, but I'm sure there's tons of things Blast can do that we're not aware of yet. And Blast is like, if we fuse like this, our biological structures will be torn apart. And he said, Sitch, I'm counting on you. And then we get this little flashback of when Blast was talking to Sitch. And he says, in case everything else fails, I'll just fuse with him. And then, I'll come back to the Monster Association and then use the monster cell separation technology on him. It's okay if you prioritize his life. So Blast, willing to just give his life so that they could bring Empty Void back to being a human. And it makes sense because Empty Void is the only chance that they really have at stopping God at this point, since it's very likely that he is the only one who has the ability to open the place where God is currently hiding or trapped or whatever. But the fusion doesn't work out because the quote-unquote power of light repelled Blast. As we've seen these last couple chapters, God's power is referred to the power of light and Blast's power is referred to the power of dark. But after they separate, Blast gained some of Empty Void's memories because their consciousness overlapped. And we see the moment when Empty Void found the God Cube and was tricked by him. And the vision that God showed him to manipulate him, which, of course is God's MO. He impersonates someone else to trick them to accept his influence. It was apparently Blast's wife. And that's where the chapter ends. And of course, this raises a whole bunch of questions. So first of all, who is this person to Empty Void? But before I even get into that, let me just acknowledge we're finally seeing Blast's wife. We never knew about this or anything. We just knew that Blast's son was blue, but we didn't know anything else. Now we're finally seeing his wife. And judging by this, I'm assuming that this is Empty Void's sister. I mean, you could also take away from this sequence that maybe they're like in a love triangle or something, but I don't think that's the case. I wouldn't be mad if that was what's going on, but I think it's more likely that this is Empty Void's sister and Blast is responsible for her death. Because, early on in the chapter, Empty Void's like, you've always been like this, irresponsibly preaching ideals and bringing disaster to those around you. So who have you managed to protect? You have a kid, don't you? All of that makes me think that this is Empty Void's sister who married Blast, or I'm just saying they're married. I'm just assuming they are, but got together with Blast and made Blue. So if this is true, I guess this means that Blue is way more powerful than we thought, because the implication here is that he has Blast's abilities and maybe even Empty Void's abilities as well, which is like insane. Also, if you look at Little Blue's hand, he has like that circle thing that Blast does. So it's like baby Blue wearing a suit as a baby? Does he have to wear the suit, or is that just a part of his biology now? Not really sure. All right, so we're getting Blast and Empty Void's flashback in this chapter. We're finding out how they met, what led to them teaming up, and how Blast met his wife and eventually had Blue with her and how she died, and what led to Empty Void becoming the big monster that he is today. Let me also point out that I am going off of a very rough translation, and that is because the normal team that graciously translate these chapters so quickly for us are having some issues today, so the chapter is delayed unfortunately, but it's okay. Once the better translation is released, I will make another video going over the chapter once again and correcting any of the things that I misinterpreted. But before I get into that, let me just quickly go over what had happened in the previous chapter to catch you guys up to speed. So we saw Blast pulling this trump card against Void as to where he was going to straight up merge with him. I know, crazy, but he did this as a way of assuring that Empty Void can be reverted back to a human and use his ability to find God with the help of Sitch and the Hero Association. But Empty Void, with the help of God's quote-unquote light power, was able to help him stop this and avoid Blast's quote-unquote dark power. And as they were merging, Blast was able to see the memories of Empty Void. And he saw what Empty Void saw when he touched the cube that allowed God to trick him to accept his influence. And that brings us to this chapter where we're going straight into a flashback of when Empty Void and Blast first met. So Blast was still green in tracking the cubes at this point in time. And as he was tracking the cube at this time, there was like a ninja monster who had one. And this eventually led to him seeing this guy fighting against Empty Void. And as they're fighting, Blast straight up snipes the ninja monster, helping Empty Void kill him. Then he comes over and picks up the cube and, explains to Empty Void what he was doing. And Empty Void is first off a little suspicious of Blast because he had never seen the dimension cannon that Blast had used before. Understandable that he is suspicious of that. He then explains to Blast that this ninja monster was originally his disciple from the ninja village. I think his name is Stain. I could be wrong. If it is Stain, that would be pretty cool because, Stain from My Hero Academia is one of my favorite characters, and he was kind of like a ninja too, in a way. And he asks Blast, like, who is God? Because he heard Stain mentioning God, saying that, he gave him the power to be able to do this and all this, and that he was also thankful to his sensei in Void, who was still the leader of the ninja village at this time, but it wasn't really like a God-disciple sweatshop the way that it was before, Blast took it down. I guess it was a pretty legitimate ninja village at this point. But Blast is like, yeah, I'm chasing God as well. I'm trying to figure out how to take this guy down. So why don't you team up with me and we'll look for the cubes together. Off on this grand journey looking for the cubes, and one night when they make camp and sleep, Empty Void's sister shows up. And I'm pretty sure her name is Moonlight Luna. It's going to be something like that. It's definitely tied to the moon in some way, but we'll just call her Luna for the sake of this video. So what I've gathered from this sequence is that Empty Void is still suspicious of Blast despite teaming up with him. He's curious as to where Blast gets his powers and his technology, so I guess he's asking Luna to investigate it. Also, Empty Void says something really interesting in this sequence, and again, rough translation, but he says something along the line of Blast working with the Agoni Foundation along with Sitch and the quote-unquote genius scientists there. So this is something we didn't really know about, and if the name Agoni sounds familiar, that's because he is the Chin guy who started the Hero Association after his Saitama saved his son. So that means that even before the formation of the Hero Association, Agoni was already doing stuff like this and working with Blast and Sitch, which also raised the question of like, who is Sitch exactly? But anyway, time goes on and Luna and Blast wind up getting married. I guess when she was investigating Blast, she just couldn't resist that blast, I'm sure she was getting blasted by Blast at this point. And it led to the birth of Blue, the current leader of the Neo Heroes, which means that he's like 15 or 16 years old right now. But anyway, as time goes on, Empty Void is still suspicious of Blast. He just can't read his eyes or something along those lines. And as more time goes on, unfortunately, Luna is killed. And it is because she was targeted via one of God's disciples, I'm pretty sure that's what's happening here. You know, them tracking down the cubes, finding God's disciples who have them trying to counterattack against Blast, you know, found one of his weaknesses, his wife, and they took her out. This makes sense because it explains why Blast is so reserved and secretive the way that he is, and why he doesn't want to make the whole God mission public, because then people would just become more targets the way that Luna was. And as you could guess, Empty Void really didn't take this too well. He actually starts thinking that Blast was involved in the death of Luna. Possibly he realized that she was spying on him, or he was spying on them, or something like that, and he took her out. I know it's ridiculous, but Empty Void was always suspicious of Blast, like we've established, and during times of grief, your mind goes to certain places. However, he doesn't completely turn on Blast. He still gives him the benefit of the doubt, thinking that maybe I'm just thinking too much about it. So as time goes on after this, Blast and Empty Void are now, of course, continuing their cube mission, because now they definitely want to take down God more than ever. And we see that Empty Void has really been suffering as a result of his sister's death. Like, he's looking gaunt, unhealthy, and they eventually come to this Buddhist-inspired temple while looking for one of the cubes. And an interesting little thing in this temple is that we see a Buddha-type statue with a singular eye. If you followed my videos, you know that I've said that the singular eye almost always correlates to God in some way, and I think this is showing that the people who built this temple were worshiping God. I mean, they probably weren't aware that he is God, since he doesn't really flat out make his existence known to everyone, but he does do it in multiple ways. Like, God's thing is like having many pathways to resurrection, or just many ways to achieving his ultimate goal, which, you know, more or less is just taking over the earth for whatever benefit he needs from it. And this was just one of like hundreds or even thousands of paths that God took, you know, developing this religion specifically in this part of the world. And this statue like breaks conveniently as they are walking past it, and a cube comes out of it and falls on Empty Void's hand. And of course, this transports him to the ethereal God manipulation world that happens when you touch the cube. And he's standing on top of the ninja village here, and I don't know if this is what it looked like at that time, or this is like a premonition as to what it is going to become, you know, since it resembles the cube. But he sees Luna and Stain here, and of course this is God manipulating him, impersonating a loved one, and the rest was history. Void unknowingly accepted God's influence here and then became the monster that we know him to be today. And the chapter then ends with Saitama holding up Empty Void's sword and saying that it's too big to be a box cutter. Like I said before, I think he's going to wind up giving these swords to Sonic and Flashy Flash. This will be like their upgrade.
All right, so we got quite the interesting chapter here today, because at the end of it, we're straight up seeing God. That's right, the God. I mean, not like the God, but the God of One Punch Man, like the final boss of the series. And if you're looking at this panel, you might be a little confused, because it's like, wait, are this a bunch of heroes or whatever going after God? It's like an army of powerful dudes that can fly. Well, it is, but it also isn't. I'll try my best to explain it. I am going off of a rough translation, but I think we could still get the job done here. So this chapter is picking up from the end of the previous, where we're in a flashback of Blast and Empty Void reliving their memories of the point of where Empty Void was tricked by God using the cube to come under his influence. And he's talking to his sister and his former disciple, who of course are not them. This is God impersonating them to manipulate him. And they say something really interesting here. So more or less they're saying that all consciousness should eventually be fused together and become one, because if that happens, then distrust and conflict and all that stuff amongst humanity wouldn't exist anymore. This is essentially a way to create a utopia. Now that's, like I said, especially interesting because we have heard this rhetoric before from none other than Psychos, or Tsairochi, whatever you want to call that thing. And coincidentally, or not so much, God was also somebody that intervened at that time. Because as we remember, as Orochi was like trying to forcibly fuse with Psychos, suddenly she saw a vision of God that looked like Jupiter to her. Although in retrospect, she was kind of looking at God's head, I guess. One of the heads, at least. And more or less, she professed this same sentiment to Tatsumaki, except she was a little more blunt about it, saying that she wants to take over the Earth with like these meat root things and absorb all of the humans and fuse into one thought entity that would end in the Earth becoming some kind of sentient thing. And since it's being reiterated here, this for sure means this is what God ultimately wants with the Earth. He wants to kind of turn it into a big meatball battery thing. I mean, I guess that's the key to his full power resurrection or something. Like, he wants to consume the planet and all of the beings on it, and that will bring him to his original tangible glory. I mean, it's still rough around the edges. We still don't fully understand what God's motives are yet, but he's definitely interested in the Earth, obviously. I mean, you could see that from chapter 1 with the rhetoric that Vaccine Man was spitting. And yes, in case you're unaware of that, I do believe that Vaccine Man was the original agent of God that we saw, although it was way more subtle back in the day. Around the start of the Monster Association cadre battle is when one went into a less subtle direction with his storytelling. But it seems like this ultimately leads to Empty Void, of course, falling for this, or maybe even just willingly accepting the influence here and becoming an agent of God, as we saw. And we come back to the present, or at least I think we are the present, meaning that we're coming back to the moment 2 chapters ago where Blast had separated from Empty Void after trying to forcibly merge with him. And now they're like, whoa, we just read each other's memories. That's crazy. But the other crazy thing here is that Blast's right arm is back and Empty Void has his swords again. I don't know how this happened. To be honest, I think that this might need a redraw or maybe just an insert of a panel to show us this, because 2 chapters ago, Empty Void took off Blast's arm. Or maybe that was 3 chapters ago. But he was missing the arm 2 chapters ago, and then we saw he put his nub through one of those portals and then, fist bumped the other hand and, created his singularity that way. But we didn't really see him reattach his arm. Unless he did it 2 chapters ago and just it's really subtle in the paneling. But for one, we definitely didn't see Empty Void get his swords back, because he was trying to rain down those dimension slashes and Saitama stopped him and took his swords from him. And there's no way Empty Void just, ran up on Saitama and took the swords back. Obviously that didn't happen. So Empty Void, I guess, can create new swords, or he had some backups or something. I don't know. Like I said, there might be a redraw, there might not be. It's not really that big of a deal. But as they start fighting again, Empty Void's like, wait, Blast, you knew about my sister and I's plot? Because we found out that Empty Void sent his sister Luna to investigate Blast, and then they eventually, got together and made Blue, and Empty Void was like still under the assumption that she was still quote unquote working Blast, and that Blast was like oblivious to all of it, but actually it was Empty Void who was the oblivious one. And Blast is like, yeah, of course I knew, I'm Blast. So they keep fighting, in a competitive back and forth battle. And after that quick exchange, they kind of go back to their corners, and Empty Void goes into Genos' stance, which is strange. Now, I say that because I don't think we've seen any other characters specifically do like this fighting stance that we've seen Genos do before. He even kind of launches the way that Genos does after initiating that stance. I guess it's like based off of karate or something. Let me know in the comments if you're like a traditional martial arts nerd. I'm more of like an MMA guy. And obviously you would never use this stance in MMA unless you're like trying to showboat like Connor or something. But as far as I know, I don't think the other ninjas use this stance and style, like this blitzing style, similar to Genos and Boros, the goat. But it makes me wonder, are they doing this on purpose? And that it means that maybe Genos learned this from the ninjas. Not that he was obviously trained by the ninjas, because pretty sure he wasn't. But there could be some kind of retcon where like, yeah, when Genos was, a teenager still, or what, I mean, I guess he still is a teenager. But, when he was a younger teenager, Dr. Kuseno sent him to the ninja village to train there. I mean, it's very unlikely. Maybe he had some ninja data that he uploaded to him, like the Matrix. I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking too into this. No, I definitely am. But anyway, he goes at Blast super fast, like I said, like Boros, even attacks him like Boros, because this really cool panel where we see him like attacking Blast is very reminiscent of that. And no, I don't think there's any connection between Empty Void and Boros other than them both being agents of God. Yes, I do think Boros is in his own way an agent of God. He's not like, a cube disciple, but I do think that he was manipulated by God, impersonating that alien seer to send him to Earth to purposely fight Blast. I already made a video about that like 2 years ago. Check it out in case you haven't already. If I remember, I hopefully will link it at the end of this video. It's pretty fun. But after Empty Void is attacking Blast here, I think we go into like this inner monologue with Empty Void here, where he's essentially explaining the truth about everything. So at the moment where Empty Void absorbed all of that godly cosmic power that was leaving him after Saitama defeated him, what happened at the beginning of this arc, as we know, he regained some sense of himself, and he didn't have that monstery face anymore, and he went into like the cosmic handsome aesthetic, if you want to call it that. And we're seeing here that once he got that back from Garo, he suddenly realized what his true goal is, and that is to act as though he's being manipulated by God, and eventually get to the point of where he can amass an army and then sacrifice himself and use the power that comes out of him to spread across them, so that he essentially makes like this super powered army of all cosmic dudes. Now, I don't know if they're all going to be the equivalent to Empty Void, or it's going to be spread out, dispersed of power, but still, that's minimum like an army of high dragons, I guess, even at that point, maybe. And he essentially wants to have this powered up cosmic army to stop God, because I guess he feels as though that's what is needed to stop him. And that's when we see that panel that I was talking about at the beginning of the video. This is kind of like, I guess, Empty Void's vision of what his ultimate goal is. Like, I don't think this is literally happening, but it could. I don't know why it would. I don't know. If this is actually happening, I'll have to make a follow-up video, but I think this is just a vision of what Empty Void wants. And yeah, he ultimately sacrifices himself to achieve this goal of what he thinks is going to stop God. And I think that this might be telling us what has already happened. Like, I think that this might be what Blast's, like, Guardians of the Galaxy are. Because I've been speculating about that too, and I think a lot of their abilities, or all of them, are reverse engineered from God. Because that's essentially what this is, right? Empty Void taking the power that God gave him and then reverse engineering it and giving it to others to stop God. Like, we still don't know the origin of Blast's powers, and the timeline's a little funky with him like exclusively getting them from reverse engineering God, but at the minimum, I think Blast was probably born in Esper. And then maybe something happened that gave him these cosmic-like abilities. The power of darkness, as he puts it, as to where God's power is the light power. And this probably happened one way or another throughout the universe, because God is like, it's implied he's affecting multiple planets, not just Earth. Like, he has many plans, many paths, like he does, with the Monster Association, with the Neo Heroes, with the organization. The same would go for like the galaxy or the universe, multiple planets, not just Earth. But it seems like Earth is like the #1 prime place that he wants. That's why all of his focus is there. Like, it's like the perfect habitat for him becoming his thought entity or whatever he needs to do. And that's where the chapter ends, with Empty Void like dissipating as he gives his power away. Although, like I said, I don't think this is literally happening. But yeah, super interesting stuff. Empty Void is a good guy now. He's face turned. He went from face to heel back to face in the span of like 10 chapters. Pretty impressive. You don't really see that too often. But let me know what you think about all this stuff in the comments. If you liked the video, please give it a like, and please subscribe if you haven't already. Happy holidays, guys. I'll see you in the next one.